Good afternoon, everybody. Happy first day of spring, and welcome to the March 20th regular meeting of the Santa Rosa City Council. Ms. Gomez, would you announce the roll, please?
Let the record show that all council members are present with the exception of Councilmember Olivares.
And I think he's on his way down. There was no closed session today, no study session. We do have a proclamation, and this is for National Surveyors Week. Is Mike Jones here? Come on down. And Ms. Combs will be reading the proclamation.
Recipient Mike Jones, Santa Rosa City Surveyor. Whereas surveying has been an essential element in the development of the human environment since the beginning of recorded history, and it is a requirement in the planning and execution of nearly every form of construction, with its most familiar modern uses in the fields of transport, building, construction, communications, mapping, and the definition of legal boundaries for land ownership. And whereas in order to accomplish their objectives, surveyors use elements of engineering, physics, mathematics, astronomy, law, and history, and theodolites. And whereas since the colonial days of the United States, surveyors have been leaders in the community, statesmen, influential citizens, and shapers of cultural standards. Former notable surveyors include George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Abraham Lincoln, Lewis and Clark, Daniel Boone, and Henry David Thoreau, among many others. And whereas many services are now provided through the use of sophisticated surveying equipment and techniques, including satellite-borne remote sensing devices, automated positioning, measuring, recording, and plotting equipment, and whereas the establishment of the week of March 18th through 24th, 2018 is National Surveyors Week, it is a fitting tribute to all surveyors. Now, therefore be it resolved that Chris Corsi, Mayor of the City of Santa Rosa, on behalf of the entire council, does hereby proclaim the week of March 18th through 24th, 2018 as National Surveyors Week. Congratulations.
Thank you, Councilmember Combs, Mayor Kersey. That was a mouthful, wasn't it? There's a lot of stuff in there. Again, I'm Mike Jones, City Surveyor, Santa Rosa Transportation and Public Works. I'm here today before you on behalf of the California Land Surveyors Association, where this week local chapter members from the association, the local chapter members of our association will be receiving proclamations from municipalities across the county. Our profession is not one that garners a lot of exposure, and generally most people know little about what we do until they require our services. A little bit about our services. Currently, the demand for these services in terms of topographic mapping and property line reestablishment is keeping the local private land surveying community very busy in areas that were tragically impacted by the recent fires. In addition, many of the local surveying firms are coordinating their work in an effort to promote cost and efficiency and to help people get back into their homes as quickly as possible. So with that, on behalf of the California Land Surveyors Association, the Sonoma County chapter, and surveyors across the country, we thank you for taking the time today to recognize National Land Surveyors Week. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jones. All right, we'll move on to staff briefings. We have a few. Mr. McGlynn.
Yes, today we're just going to have a very brief update on the fire recovery and rebuild update 6.1. I sent out an email earlier this afternoon to council to say at the the April 3rd meeting, there will be Cal OES and FEMA will rejoin us, and I've asked them to specifically do a presentation on the issue resolution around the debris program. So we won't be covering that tonight, but I am going to ask Mr. Lowenthal to come forward and give a brief update on debris.
Good evening, Mayor Corsi, members of the council. As of this evening, currently the county ROEs are 3,708. They have now come in alignment with the Army Corps' numbers, so we've been working really diligently to make sure all of our records are starting to match as we move forward. The county, of the 745 private opt-outs, 335 of them are complete, certified, and done. On the city side, we're holding at 405, with 16 of our commercial buildings accounted for, and 250 of our residential properties complete. The world that we've been looking at, we've been talking about as we move closer to the April 9th deadline. We're currently right around 20 parcels that have not completed any debris removal under the private opt-out. Most notably of the commercial structures that we've seen are the Hopper Lane Apartments, the Hilton Hotel, and the gun shop. The remainder of the properties are primarily single-family residential properties. Based on the communications that we've had with majority of those properties, we're confident that they will be able to complete the deadline, and we're working on plans and the contract in the event that any of the remaining residential properties and or commercial properties need to be abated following the deadline. To clarify one of the starting points that we discussed last week for PG&E for the April 1st start date, they're looking at now the first week of April, but still going to be moving forward. There was also follow-up questions and email discussion regarding the joint trenching. A correspondence will come out this week clarifying that issue and will be addressed to council. As the city manager indicated, the rework and issue resolution process is kind of full steam ahead right now. We are actively engaged with the county at the tactics and planning meetings with the Army Corps twice a week still, and working to get a better understanding of how that's going to work within the city. Our understanding is the majority of the properties involved in that process are in Fountain Grove, was where we're seeing a lot of the issues that are involved in that process are popping up. One issue, one item that we've talked about with the, in respect to the clearance report and documentation, unfortunately that has gone back to legal at a state and federal level. So with the two contracts that were in place, Cal OES's contract and the FEMA contract, they're really trying to make all the language match up and work appropriately. So I have been tentatively promised that we should have a draft again within the next couple weeks. But we're eager to move forward with that. And I think, and a little bit of clarification also on one of the discussions we've had on the transition plan as the Army Corps and the state and federal government begin to transition out, how they're going to transition back to the locals. I understand as of this morning, they have said they're going to add a new layer into that process. So with the regional representatives that we have from either Army Corps or US EPA, any of those federal agencies, they have local offices. And so they did indicate as of this morning that that's going to be built into it. So it'll provide us with a little bit of buffer and not have to worry about taking on that workload as quickly as we anticipated. And that is it for this week.
Thank you. Just want to clarify, the 20 properties that you mentioned where no cleanup has taken place, those are 20 city properties?
Correct. That's only within the city.
Okay, and we're in touch with all of those property owners?
In touch where we've left a voicemail. We have at least one property owner that I believe owns 3 different residential properties that we've left multiple vestiges for and have not had any contact with recently. But we have some options of how to get a hold of this person. One of the concepts we've been talking about is once we do get a solid list, we had a meeting that went back up. We had a meeting yesterday, now that we're at the kind of the 3-week mark, to get a better understanding of our commercial and residential pool of properties that could potentially be involved in this process. And so we're in kind of preliminary discussions of once we get a good idea of what those properties look like, is potentially doing what we've done in the past where we provide the information to council and see if we can help engage with those parcels. But we're hopeful, like I said, that a majority of the residential properties, with the exception of a handful, we're pretty confident about. I know that we're all eager. We see the gun shop. We're working to figure out what's going on with that property. My understanding too is after speaking with code enforcement this morning with the Hopper Lane Apartments, they have not moved forward yet, was primarily because they had to work on essentially relocating the tenants that were within that complex so that they weren't directly impacted by the debris removal operation.
Okay. Let us know if you need help from this body. Thank you very much. Any other questions? I do have one card on this, Dwayne DeWitt.
Use the overhead projector. Hello, my name is Dwayne DeWitt. I'm from Roseland, and I was hoping that in the future, when you have these updates, you could have staff also tell you how many people who lost their homes have been rehoused. This is something that is really an important matter 6 months down the road from the fire. On Wednesday, I was talking with a veteran, United States Army veteran, Vietnam War, lost his home at Journey's End. He's been staying in a hotel. The FEMA money's gonna run out, and he doesn't know where to go. And it's not like the city's really outreached much to him. He's actually told me, he said, no one has really talked with him much. So I'm hoping that in your reports, you'll get staff updates about these things and not just property. Now, up here is a map, and I put it up because you can see Journey's End would have been right there at the end of Shenate Road coming out here, past there, up here by Bicentennial. Anyway, the main thing of it is it's in the city limits, it's been in the city limits for a really long time, and there's 40 mobile homes there that are still unoccupied. And one resident that lived in them said she cleaned hers, she's ready to live in it, it's just a matter of getting the city to help get it back up to use. So that would be really important. Now, one other thing I've heard is that, we've got talks with affordable housing developers, so that's gonna take precedent. And you have to understand that affordable housing developers usually takes about 3 to 5 years to get something done. Right now over on Benton at North Street, you're getting a small project in there for 7 people. Veterans funding is helping, but it's taken 4 years. So we need to have something that's a little bit more expedited, that's the term. So here I have a nice book that came out back in, 22, 23 years ago. Nice architect down in the city, and by the city I mean San Francisco. And he points out that you can get small 20 by 20 foot detached houses together quickly, and you can get people into them quickly. So part of the situation here is that we're so wrapped up in the old model, and we're not seeing new ways to deal with things. We got some containers over in Roseland that were all retrofitted to be used as housing, just still sitting there because permitting wasn't allowed. So it's up to you folks to think different and have a new approach, something not the same old, and we could get some positive things where we could house almost all the people in the city who'd like to have housing. Think about it as a democratic approach. Thank you.
Mr. McGlynn, 6.2, please.
Yes, staff illness this evening, so we're going to be skipping to 6.3. We'll reschedule 6.2. 6.3, status of code enforcement concerning Bodine asphalt plant. Sue Gallagher, city of, the two Davids presenting.
Good afternoon, Mayor Corsia, members of the council. David Ewan, Director of Planning and Economic Development, and with me is Dave Gwine, Director of Housing and Community Services. We're going to give a quick update along with the City Attorney on the activities around Bodine asphalt plant. There's 2 issues that we're working through in the city currently with Bodine. The 2 issues revolve around sound and permitting. The City and Bodine received an administrative order that dealt with the permitting issue and gave direction about that permits were needed for that project to move forward. After that, we have met with Bodine and talked about what that meant. There is some disagreement in terms of the type of permit, but the city has made a decision that a minor conditional use permit will be required before we can move forward with the design review process and the building permits for the modifications to the plant. So at that point, so currently we're working on a letter that's going to go out to Bodine. It will be out shortly that describes this stance. We have talked to Bodine about this. And we will lay out what's required, the timeline for that, and then what they need to do to submit their permits. So once a conditional use permit has been approved, they can then actually in parallel can do the design review process and then submit for the building permits. At that point, once construction is complete, we will evaluate the sound issues. So the improvements being made are supposedly to support and to deal with the sound issues. And so after that work is done, code enforcement will monitor the sound and we'll evaluate if that code enforcement case is still relevant based on the sound heard from the plant based on those improvements. And so that's where we are at this point. Again, the next step for us is to get this letter out to them describing the process and then having them submit their plans so we can get them scheduled for the minor conditional use permit process. We'd be happy to answer questions if you want any more detail on that.
I guess I'll ask the obvious question. If this operation needs permits to be operating, why is it operating?
Yes, so typically when we have a non-conforming use, which again this is, there's the facilities that are currently working right now, we typically allow it to operate if they're moving forward to get it permitted. So again, that could be a policy discussion, but typically we work with people. If people are moving forward to address the issue, which again is laid out in the letter we're proposing, which is a minor conditional use permit for that structure that's currently there, then they would go through the design review process for anything they want to change to that structure. And a building permit to actually do the work. That's the process that they're going to be going through, just like anybody would if we identify a building or a structure that's currently not permitted, such as an ADU or a home or some addition. If it's safe and habitable in a home situation, we typically don't require them to leave while we're doing that process. That's correct.
This has been going on for quite a while. I don't know how many years or months at this point, but at one point, wasn't there work done that was done without permits? And can you kind of go through quickly what the activities have been between the city and Bodine over the last couple of years?
Sure, there was a disagreement on what permits required for what type of work. The position from Bodine at the time was that they did not need the permits that we were requiring. Again, administrative process was in the favor of the city, saying that no, the permits were needed, and so again, that's where we are today. And that's
how long ago has that been?
So code enforcement first received complaints from neighboring residents in May of 2016 that generated the site inspection.
Okay. Other questions? Please, Ms. Gallagher.
Sure, if I may clarify. The initial complaints were with respect to noise. Bodine came forward with a plan for noise attenuation. It was as we were processing those applications that it was discovered. First, we had a dispute about whether those noise attenuation measures required a design review or not. The hearing officer did confirm that design review was required. But as we worked through that initially, it was discovered that there were several elements to the plant that had not received permits some time ago. which included the installation of the bag house and relocation of storage tanks and some other smaller elements. Again, so we had the noise violations on one track. The noise attenuation measures then triggered the broader look, discovered the issues with the unpermitted construction and modifications of the plant. We went forward to the hearing officer on those building permit and design review issues. The hearing officer ordered last spring that Bodine is required to obtain those building permits. The order was somewhat ambiguous as to the need for a conditional use permit. It's our position that that order does confirm that a conditional use permit is required. Bodine has disputed that. Bodine did come in. I think it's important to note that Bodine did come in after this order was issued and attempted to submit for building permits and did submit payment for their fines as ordered by the hearing officer. We have not been able to move forward on that without the minor conditional use permit in place. We were moving forward on that before the fires. Of course, the fires interrupted the process. We began again with discussions with Bodine to try to get full compliance. Back in December, we met with them, and we are moving forward. The noise issue is still standing aside for the moment. We have been monitoring noise levels during the day. There have been issues about monitoring at night, in that apparently there has not been a lot of night operations and the coordination with the experts. But that Bodine's position is that once the noise attenuation measures are in place, that will resolve all of the remaining noise violations. That's still yet to be seen. So what will go out quickly is the communication that confirms to Bodine that a minor use permit will be required, is required, and that we will be moving forward with additional code enforcement actions if that application is not received quickly.
So do I understand correctly that Bodine still disputes the need for a conditional use permit?
Yes.
So I think, Mr. Ewan, you said that as long as things are moving forward on them complying, that the plant can continue to operate. I fail to see here how things are moving forward.
I think we're going to need to issue the letter and then make a determination about whether the things move forward. Respectfully, Mr. Mayor, I mean, without the letter, once again, we haven't given them a chance to formally respond to that letter. I believe that's part of the question here.
Yes, that is part of the question. This was the subject of discussions, again, a couple of months ago when we met with Bodine representatives. And we were at that meeting trying to reach a resolution. We had follow-up discussions after that. We're not able to reach a resolution. And from our perspective, the resolution is that that conditional use permit application is filed. Therefore, we're now in the process of moving forward more formally in writing, and then we'll move forward with the code enforcement as it's necessary. We're hopeful.
That the letter is coming from my office, and so again, it did take some time. Obviously, we've been fairly distracted over the past few months, so we are getting back on it to try to get this letter out. So again, they have clear direction. Bodine has two options at that point. One, they can follow and move forward with the conditional use permit. And what we've done, like we've talked about in this chamber, it is a zoning administrator level action, but because of the interest and importance of this item and both from the council and the public, we've elevated that to the planning commission, which is something that we do on occasion. So this item will be heard by the planning commission. If they do take that minor conditional use permit to the planning commission acts on it, that the appeal body would then be the city council at that point. The other option that the Bodine has is to appeal my decision, and if they appeal the decision that they need a conditional use permit, that would go to the planning commission, and planning commission would make that determination if the conditional use permit, if basically the direction is supported or not. So those are the two actions that we'll find once this letter goes out.
And I do want to clarify that conditional use permit is simply on the issue of replacing what used to be a pond with the bag house and with moving the storage tanks to a new location. It does not reopen the entire use of the plant. It is limited to a use permit to swap out those two elements.
Ms. Combs and then Mr. Rogers.
Thank you for bringing the status report forward. I very much appreciate that we're hearing about it. I also appreciate that your department has really been overwhelmed since the fires with a lot of work. Unfortunately, this is certainly pre-fire problems. May 2016 is pre-fire. My recollection is that we've been talking about this plant an awfully long time. And the analogy that I would like to introduce is, if my next door neighbor is making a lot of noise day and night, I don't want to wait until they've created soundproofing in their house and gotten the permitting to do that. I would like their noise to be turned down so that I can live in my house. And it seems to me that these neighbors are in a very similar situation. It really concerns me that this plant specifically admitted that they had sound issues. It seems to, I'm having trouble understanding why we don't have a stop work on them. And I appreciate that you want to send another letter, but I don't understand why we aren't stopping until they come into compliance.
And I would suggest two things. One is, if the council wants to reconsider the general policy of allowing businesses to continue while they are working on resolution, that's something that we can bring back and agendize for the council. The other piece that I would suggest is that if we want to discuss more of the specifics of this particular code enforcement proceeding and how we're moving forward, that it would be appropriate to schedule a closed session on that item.
Because we have long-term noise problems, it's really not the same as, you know, some business who we discover they have a problem and they recognize they have a problem and they, you know, they're working with us. It's a little different from the usual because of the long-termness of it.
Sure.
But in a history of permitting problems, I can't help but agree with the mayor about not feeling that they are in fact on track, cooperating with the city. I do have questions about whether or not we can require a permanently placed measurement system for sound, and would like to know if we can have that conversation, which may need to take place in closed session. But I'm also hearing there are issues regarding the height of materials stored, regarding hours of operation. I understand that air quality we've had sort of a round of dealing with air quality issues with them also. So I'm not seeing the reason why we would be flexible.
So again, I think the city attorneys, if you want to have a certain, I will say, that there are challenges with the process the city engaged in up until the time the team sitting in front of you has taken on the responsibility for this conversation.
Yes.
I would urge you, if you want to have specific conversations about those potential remedies and where you want to go, I would urge you to take that to closed session.
Okay.
Staff has no issue about taking that to closed session. We were simply providing an update of where we stand, but I believe you need the advice of your counsel in closed session around those issues.
Okay. I can take a hint. Sounds like we need to discuss in closed session.
Mr. Rogers.
Yeah, if you need a motion in a second, I'm happy to be the second on that as well, to bring that into closed session for that discussion.
Yeah, there's no formal, this is just a staff update, so there's no formal action that can be taken, but we've certainly heard an inclination to bring it to closed session.
Where I struggle a little bit with this conversation is my understanding of a legal non-conforming use means that it should be ever restrictive, that the ability to expand should never be able to happen, regardless of whether or not they've gone through this process or not.
That there are legal subtleties to that. In fact, there are under law some opportunities to change things, and in fact, Bodine came in a number of years ago to add silos to their property with a conditional use permit. But these are all legal issues that I would really be very happy to bring to you in closed session and lay it out in more detail and allow the council to discuss and give us direction in that setting.
So I'm happy for us to discuss it in closed session, but we need to be able to go out and explain to the neighbors what's happening as well. So if we have to put that off to have that conversation, that's fine. But I want to make sure that the byproduct of that is something that we can share public as well.
Well, again, that is a decision of the body about how the body wants to move forward, but we would advise you go in closed session so you're fully briefed on the matter, and then the group can make a decision about how they want to proceed.
Okay, I'd also like to include in that discussion, if we don't have an answer now, on the hours issue. So I remember when we discussed the contract a year ago for asphalt, the comments made in the paper seem to suggest that the hours issue has already been resolved and dispensed with, and that's not my understanding. And so I'd like an update or information on if the city feels as though that issue has been resolved, how did it get resolved without coming before the council or the planning commission or any other entity that votes and makes a decision? And if it hasn't been resolved, how are we going to resolve it?
Understood.
Can you give us an estimate at this point of a timeline of a letter going out and then a conditional use permit?
Yes. So when the letter goes out, basically as the city attorney mentioned, they did come in right away with the design review packet and the building permit application and fee. Now what they'll need to do is package this up for the planning commission. Typically the schedule to get on a planning commission takes some time. It takes 3 to 6 months. Again, that's a process that we're trying to narrow down. We're going to move this forward as quick as possible to get that on the planning commission, but we typically always give that range for developing the staff report, noticing, and getting on the agenda. So I would estimate about three months to get on that planning commission agenda. And then once that decision is made, we can move forward. The other thing we can do is do a concurrent design review process to have those go the same path, so that by the end they can submit building permits if both are approved and move forward with the project.
Councilor, are there other questions on this?
Yeah, I wasn't done yet.
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Rogers.
I also wanted to ask for a status update on that contract that we discussed a year ago. My understanding was that the city was not going to actually execute that contract and use asphalt from the Bodine plant until they were in full compliance. And I wanted to make sure that that is still the case. I'm seeing nodding heads, but okay.
Ms. Combs.
So, 3 months puts us into the season where folks often sleep with their windows open at night or want to have fresh air in their house, where they, want to have full use of their indoor and outdoor spaces the next 3 months. With the noise not resolved, with that kind of time frame. That's a concern of mine. And I think we need to be seriously discussing at some point either reduction of schedule, limited hours, or stop at some point while we're waiting for the permitting process. It just is a concern of mine that the noise continues in a neighborhood. Thank you.
Any other questions, council? I have a couple of cards on this. Dwayne DeWitt will be followed by Michael Allen.
Once again, I'm going to use the overhead. And I'm going to hand you these for a pleasant distraction if you don't want to hear what I have to say. Oh, I don't need the overhead because I handed you those. My apologies. Hello, my name is Dwayne DeWitt, and I'm from Roseland, and I just handed the council a couple of documents, one from 1995, one from 2003. And the 95 document basically talks about how you should try to have things as open as possible. And so I understand what just occurred here and this idea that you have to get as much information as you can first in a closed session. But by the same token, how I got involved in dealing with things back in 1994 and 95 was a company called Acme Auto Wreckers. They had 26 violations for stormwater pollution. And the guy just kept going forward. He didn't really care because it's like there is no enforcement. And as Mr. Schwedhelm has said in the past, without enforcement, laws don't really matter. They don't have an effect. And so what we have here with Bodine is their approach is like, hey, you know, we're big, we got approval, we're going to do what we do until you force us to make it different. So I'm hoping that you folks will look at the second document from 2003, which pointed out back then, Mayor Wright was talking about neighborhood advisory councils. And the way you can really get the news you can use on this situation is if there was a neighborhood advisory council for right around that Bodine plant. I already told you last time that it stinks to high heaven as far over to the JC across the freeway. And it's one of these things that people all over the city notice when the wind is right. So I'm just hoping that you folks will take the high road on this and say, okay, we're going to find ways to open this process up so the neighbors have just as much voice in this as the Bodine company and the permit, the code enforcement people. It's one of those things where you can plead, well, we don't have enough staff. We can't do this. But actually, this is the quality of life issue that you have to do. That's why you exist. Government's for health, safety, and welfare of the community, not for business, not for people making private property and profits at that. It's about you folks making sure the greater community is protected from the noxious fumes and pollution that come forward from that plant, plus the noise. I get off work at 11 at night a lot of times, and you can hear it when I come by. It's one of those things. It's like, this is real. So please let the neighbors have their voice be heard just as loud as the business community. Thank you for your time.
Michael Allen.
Yes, Michael Allen, representing the Accountable Development Coalition. And first of all, I want to thank you for your service. Having been in elected office, I know what it's like being in these hearings and hearing testimony. So I really sincerely do appreciate your service to the city of Santa Rosa, especially after watching last week's session on the maps. I'm here at the request of the West End neighborhood. Just to refresh your memory, the Accountable Development Coalition is made up of concerned citizens of Santa Rosa, the Greenbelt Alliance, the Housing Advocacy Group, the IBEW, the Living Wage Coalition, the North Bay Labor Council, the Sonoma County Transportation and Land Use Coalition, and the trades, and of course, Conservation Action. We are here, I am here tonight as an unpaid volunteer because the neighborhood has asked me to draft yet another letter to send to you, which I will do, but really all the letter wants to focus on is that when I sent you a letter back in July after we had a meeting, The one demand that the neighborhood is very focused on is that we believe that it's within your reasonable police powers to ensure safe and healthy working conditions and living conditions for this neighborhood, that you limit the hours of the plant from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. We realize that the staff is struggling with the legal subtleties and all those various things regarding particulate matter, noise, all those other things that have been a struggle over the number of years. Frankly, I kind of feel like I'm watching a basketball game where Bodine is dribbling in the back court and just waiting for the clock to kind of run out. And the clock has been running for a long time. And so I guess my main message to you is that this is foursquare in your reasonable police power to provide for a safe neighborhood and a healthy neighborhood to do something. And it's a reasonable restriction on their hours of operation. The neighbors have been very clear with me that they're not trying to put Bodine out of business. They're just trying to make their neighborhood livable. And I do remember that when we met with this, the last question I had when I met with the city manager and the mayor is a question I asked myself. If this was my neighborhood, would I want this condition to go on and on without it being abated? And I think the answer is no. You know, and I feel very privileged that I'm not living in a neighborhood where this problem is going on. So I know that you're smart, reasonable people. I do believe the staff is trying to resolve this. So that's why I'm here tonight, just to make it really clear that when I talk to the neighborhood, this 6 a.m. to 6 p.m., they feel it's going to go a long way to resolve the problems and concerns of the neighborhood. And thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you. That's all the cards I have. Unless there's further questions or comments, thank you very much. Moving on to city manager's report.
Nothing to report.
Ms. Gallagher?
Nothing to report.
Any statements of abstention from council members tonight? Move on to mayors and council members' reports. Who wants to start? Mr. Sawyer.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, last Saturday we had the unveiling of the contents, most of the contents, I would say, of the time capsule that was put into a vault in Courthouse Square in 1968. It was nicely attended. We had between 75 and 100 people, and the weather was quite nice, and they were, I think, excited about not only what they were seeing, but what is still yet to be displayed. And that will happen at the museum from 2 to 4 this coming Saturday. It's free and open to the public at the museums of Sonoma County. And there's more to come. And this is, in a sense, a soft kickoff to the September 8th celebration for our sesquicentennial this coming September. So if you have the time, do please attend the discussion. There will be Professor Margaret Purser from Sonoma State University will be there to talk about why perhaps certain objects were put into the time capsule 50 years ago, and then what we might be placing there now to represent our current social and political environment, and also tie it to Santa Rosa. And there are more details at our website. We have a Facebook page by the same name. The website is www.santarosacity150.com. And if you can't remember that or didn't get it, a simple search will get that to you. And our Facebook page is Santa Rosa City 150. So check it out. And if you have the time, come by the museum on Saturday. It should be interesting.
Great. Anyone else? Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Had a couple of meetings last week that sort of dovetail together. One is we had our Build, Rebuild weekly meeting where we began reviewing the 70-ish pieces of legislation that have been introduced in Sacramento related to the fire, and came out of that meeting with a couple of recommendations that I took to the mayors and council members' legislative meeting the next day to ask for support and recommendations from that body. What I'd like to do, if it works for the council, is there were 6 recommendations that came out of that. We will be sending, as an association, a support letter up to Sacramento for each of those bills. And I'd like this body to hear a little bit about what those were, and then also send our own support letters as well on those bills now that the association has moved. The first bill is SB 833. That's Senator McGuire's bill related to the emergency alert protocols around red alerts. It makes sure that the different tools that are available during a disaster are tailored to a local jurisdiction and that all of them are deployed. I know that Chief Gostner has provided some comments and some possible amendments to the author's office, and that they are working on that. The League of Cities, Mayors and Council Members Association has taken a support position on that. I would ask us to do the same. Do you want to take these one at a time, Mr. Mayor, or should I go all the way through all 6?
Why don't you go through them?
Okay. The second one is SB 894. That is by Senator Dodd and Senator McGuire. And this one is actually a retroactive bill that would require insurers to have 2 annual renewal periods for 24 months total after a dwelling has been destroyed. It requires the insurers to report to the commissioner if they do not offer to renew a policy or decide not to offer or renew policies in that area after a declaration of a disaster. SB 897, again by Senators McGuire and Dodd, is related to property insurance. And I know all of you, like I did, heard how traumatizing it was for many to go through and have to actually itemize all of what they lost in their home in order to get paid out by insurance. This bill would require insurance without the itemization to insure or to pay out 80% of what that policy is. And again, this one would be retroactive, so it wouldn't just correct the problem going forward, but it actually would help our residents who are affected by this fire. SB 969 by Senator Dodd, we've discussed in concept at this body. It requires a backup battery for garage doors, both on the installation and the manufacturing for the garage doors, beginning January 1st of next year. AB 1772 by Assemblymember Aguiar Curry and Assemblymember Wood would extend the time frame for homes and businesses to rebuild with their insurance properties from 2 years to 3 years. Obviously, this has been a significant conversation for us in the scope of what people are trying to do. And again, this one would be retroactive. And finally, AB 1877 from Assemblymember Limon. It would require the OES to translate emergency communications into the language other than English most spoken by a majority in an impacted area. And again, just like I did, I'm sure many of you heard stories about how difficult it was for our Spanish-speaking community to understand what was happening during the fire, and took the state stepping in to try to start to translate with some of our local OES folks to plug that gap. This would make that a requirement on the state. So those are the 6 bills, and again, SB 833, SB 894, SB 897, SB 969, AB 1772, and AB 1877. And so I would ask that this body send support letters for those bills as well.
So just a point of clarification, there's no vote during this item. It would need, if something needs to be referenced back to the body for fuller discussion, I think that's where
Correct.
This is driving.
Yeah, if there's opposition to any of these, we can bring it back.
So I appreciate the Mayors and Councils Ledge Committee taking a look at this. There are at least 64, maybe more now, pieces of legislation related to the fires. This list of 6 distills it down to what I consider the most important and immediate items. Happy to hear discussion from the council, but if there's no objection, I'll go ahead and write letters of support for all 6 of these bills. Start with Mr. Schwedhelm.
Thank you. We also heard from our school board president another bill, AB 2228, that I would also like your consideration to support. I believe Vice Mayor Rogers said there was some discussion, but what I know of that would be one that I think would help our school district, who's been significantly impacted by the fires, and wondering if we could add that to this list.
Yeah, so AB 2228 by Assemblymember Wood, it would backfill schools for lack of attendance during the fire in particular. It is a really important one. The committee did end up holding that one pending some more information from Dr. Wood's office about where the dollars were coming from. It does look like it's Prop 98. But they wanted to bring that back for more information. I'm happy for us to step out in front and support that as well, but we will be discussing that and hopefully bringing back that recommendation as well. The other was AB 2911 by Assemblymember Friedman that would require the state fire marshal to recommend updated building standards that provide for comprehensive site and structure fire risk reduction by January 31st of 2019. That was one that the association also decided to hold and get a little bit more information on it before they moved forward. But again, very comfortable in supporting those as well.
Ms. Combs.
I just wanted to put my 2 cents in that these look like good bills for us, for the state. And I hope that I'm not positive what our process is, but if the mayor can write a letter on these, I would certainly be supportive of that concept.
All right. Not hearing any objection, I'll write letters in support of the 6 that you listed, and I'll add the AB 2228 on backfilling school ADA money. I think that we have heard clearly that our school district, and I'm sure many school districts in fire zones throughout the state, are suffering financially because of students not returning to school after the fires. And I would certainly be in support of that.
Yeah, and this body meets once a month. And just to give you a little context on where we are in the legislative calendar, we are not now past the bill introduction deadline, so you shouldn't see too many more bills unless they come out in the budget. And the policy committee has to meet by April 19th, I believe is the last day for all policy bills in their original house to be heard. So you will hear next month. I'll probably bring a couple of more bills to this body once the mayors and council members have had a chance to go through them. But that meeting is only a couple hours long, and 70 bills was not going to happen. So we'll do this in stages as we can.
Great.
If I may just ask, 2911 is the one with the fire marshal updating standards. I assume that's speeding up the implementation of new building construction standards.
Well, it's more of, if you want to think about it in terms of our wildland-urban interface plan, how there are areas where you have mitigation to try to slow the spread of the fire, this would be the state marshal making recommendations about that throughout the whole state.
Yes.
And I do believe, looking for low-cost retrofit options that people could do to help prevent that as well as new construction. And so that is, the goal is by January 31st, 2019 to have that report out. So it is a bit of a tight timeline, which people were concerned about.
Okay, thank you.
All right, does that conclude your report?
Yep.
All right. Mr. Swedhelm.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I attended a couple of the same ad hoc meetings other members of this body did, the Build, Rebuild, and the Financing Infrastructure ad hoc meeting. Also attended the San Francisco Empowered Communities presentation. They were a group of individuals from San Francisco that were brought here by the Office of Community Engagement. I want to compliment the city manager. I really am appreciative of those efforts, and it'll be interesting to hear what our next steps are, especially there was 2 other groups that met with the same or saw the same presentation, so I think there's a lot of potential in there. I also attended the time capsule event, and for those that weren't able to make it, it was really interesting. I think there was 8 members, including Councilmember Sawyer, who were there when the time capsule was first buried, including the gentleman who tossed a penny in there. And he was a Herbert Slater student at the time he tossed the penny in there. So it was just kind of cool coming full circle there. And I also do want to, give one more reminder to the community that tomorrow will be the Santa Rosa Plain Groundwater Sustainability Agency Financing Options Community Meeting. It's real important. It's from 5:30 to 7:30 at Finley. On the 2 agenda items that I think would be really interesting for those members of the Santa Rosa Basin to understand why do we need to manage groundwater now and financing options. So again, that's tomorrow from 5:30 to 7:30, Finley Community Center. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Tibbetts, anything? Ms. Combs?
I had the good fortune to attend Career Day with the Roseland Middle School Rams, doing a presentation with 4 different classrooms of middle schoolers. Middle schoolers are taller than I remembered. And they were very engaged, very interested in government and jobs in government and how to prepare. Of course, we made the pitch for involvement, whatever career line you went in. We need folks in our community to be more actively involved in taking part in their government, boards and commissions, et cetera. It was a good event. It made me mindful of a recent report on youth disconnection in America. 16 to 24-year-olds in our area, we have roughly 10% of 16 to 24-year-olds who are neither working nor in school. And they are viewed as disconnected youth, and trying to figure out how to re-engage them, how to get them involved locally I think is a key thing we could be discussing and talking about. And sitting with those kids, it was kind of hard to believe we had that high a percentage even in our area. And kind of a reminder that we want to keep our youth as engaged as possible. I wanted to remind the council that I'll be phoning in on April 3rd. I'll be out of town that day, but I'll phone in that day. And I also, I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. This past weekend, I was at Yosemite National Park for the Yosemite Policymakers Conference. It's an annual conference put on by the Local Government Commission. This was on building livable communities. I was on a panel with Supervisors Gore and Gorin and Supervisor Das Williams from Santa Barbara County about our disaster and recovery efforts. There were also several discussions about clean energy, about going to an all-electric net zero type of building model that's been talked about a little bit in these chambers lately, and also some interesting presentations on autonomous vehicles. I also wanted to second Councilmember Schwedhelm's compliments on the discussion we had last Thursday in this chamber from the San Francisco Empowered Communities Program. This is an effort by our community outreach folks to expand on what we're doing in our neighborhoods. As was mentioned earlier this evening, we can do a better job, not just of getting our message out to the neighborhoods, but engaging our neighborhoods to get their message to us in a way that goes beyond the 3 minutes of public comment and is more baked into the culture of the city. I look forward to hearing more about that as we go forward. Yesterday I was at Maria Carrillo High School for their Day of Dialogue, talked to a class about rebuilding community in both the physical and the person-to-person realm. Had an interesting conversation with a bunch of young people who have been really impacted by the fires in this community. Several of them had lost their homes. Every hand went up in that room when I asked if anyone had a friend who had moved away since the fires. This is something that is going to affect this community for a long time, and those young people are not accepted from that. With that, we will move on to our consent calendar. Mr. McGlynn.
Item 11.1, resolution authorizing application to the Low Carbon Transit Operations Program for $252,853 in fiscal year 2017-18 funds and authorizing the Director of Transportation and Public Works to sign the certifications and assurances and authorizing the mayor to sign the authorized agent form. Item 11.2, resolution, Transportation Development Act, TDA, Article 3, grant application for fiscal year 2018-19. Item 11.3, resolution, bid awards, sole manufacturing purchase orders for 2018 Ford Police Interceptor SUVs. Item 11.4, resolution, approval of cooperative purchase for fire department portable radio replacement through Houston Galveston Area Council HGAC Cooperative Purchasing Program. 11.5, resolution, bid award, General Services Agreements F001651. 11.6, resolution, amendment to grant agreement for Homeless Outreach Services Team hosts program providing funding for landlord incentives and rapid rehousing, Housing First Fund. 11.7, ordinance adoption, ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa adding Article 5 to Chapter 6-56 of the Santa Rosa City Code relating to the establishment of community benefit districts. Item 11.8, ordinance adoption, ordinance of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa amending Title 20 of the Santa Rosa City Code, reclassification of property located at 2375 Las Olivias Road, APN 181-010-040 to the RR-20 Rural Residential District, file number REZ 17-009.
Thank you, Mr. McGlynn. Council, are there questions on any of these items? Mr. Rogers?
Yeah, Mr. McGlynn, just a quick question. Where do our reserves sit at for our general fund? Can you give us some form of a...
It is the presentation you got before is pretty close to that. We can get you a number. We're scheduling some notifications to come out this week, but I don't want to misquote myself right now, so we will notify you where those sit.
Okay, I'd appreciate that, because I know obviously when we first discussed item 11.6, we did not have the shift in the cost sharing with FEMA to the 90-10, and I know that was a substantial aspect of that conversation.
There's still significant cost sharing part of the equation that we need to go through. Remember, we were the lucky community that qualified for all categories of FEMA eligibility, and we're still going through that cost sharing exercise as it relates to the other categories, basically C through G.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Schwedhelm.
Thank you. On 11.5. Thank you, Alan. So my question was with the vendor and that bid amount. And I know the staff report makes reference to, the low bid was 197,000, next lowest was 433K, and then the highest was 1.6 million. And I guess I'm a little concerned that are we getting the same quality product when that is so markedly 50% lower than the next lowest bid? And I kind of have a question about quality there. And I know in the staff report it says staff has received good reference check responses for ongoing contract services. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure, Councilmember Swedhelm. We noticed that as well as we went through the process. It was quite a drastic change between the others. We did call the vendor. We made very clear what our scope was and that the vendor would be able to comply with that without amendment. Again, the reference checks also were good. This vendor is expanding their business into the Northern California area. They do have staff available up here that would staff this contract. So based on all of that information, we felt comfortable with moving forward with the contract.
Are there opportunities, because I saw this is a 3-year contract, if some of those performance measures aren't meeting our expectations, will we have an opportunity to reevaluate this contract?
Yes.
Okay. And who would be responsible for that? Your department or another?
It would be, well, the police department is the recipient really of the service. So between them and us, we could provide options to the council on canceling the contract based on that service.
So I guess for me, as far as oversight with the staff report, so it says Finance, Police, Transportation, Public Works, and Recreation and Parks Department. Right. A concern I would have if everyone's a little bit unsettled with each of those 4 departments, but if y'all got together, said, you know, and I would hope this is not going to occur, but if someone was tasked with actually making, you know, checking a 6-month mark with each of those specific departments, because what they ask of their security services may be very different.
We could absolutely check in with those departments and ensure that the service is at the level that it needs to be.
That would be wonderful. So thank you on that. And then I also have some questions on 11.6.
I have questions on 11.5, if you don't mind.
Oh, let's get those first. Well, Mr.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'll join you on 11.6 as well. Thank you for coming down and being patient with us.
Ms. Combs, would you lift up your microphone just a little bit, please?
Yeah, thank you. Do we have information about whether or not that group has come back and requested modifications to the contract that would involve increased payments in the past? There's a technical term that I'm blanking on the word right now, but
I'm sorry, I'm not
change
quite,
orders. Thank you.
Okay, I'm not quite sure I caught the question.
Does this particular low bidding firm have a history of change orders?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. This isn't the first time where we've seen a incredible range in bids, and I'm also interested in whether or not we have a policy when we have such an incredible range of bids that triggers rebidding the item or some other action, such as you made phone calls to make clear that the item was well understood by the low bidder. And I'm more asking, when we come back with contract review information, contract process information that I hope someday we'll get to, that we consider having some kind of a policy trigger for when there's such a broad range of bids that we have a sort of set action or set of questions that we.
I'll just mention that, yes, we can certainly provide some answers to you when we bring that package back, but I will also note that there are significant constraints under state law, so we need to, we'll bring back the package
within our ability
with
legally
yes.
to do so.
Yes.
When I did bid packages, if we had a spread of a certain percentage, we would rebid
Yes.
or.
Yes, we do have some flexibility, so we'll bring back different options.
Much. And again, I appreciate it. I don't mind getting a good deal. It just makes me nervous when there's that kind of a range.
Thank you. And Mr. Swedhelm, you had questions on 11.6?
Yes, 11.6. Welcome, Kelly.
Good afternoon.
So I had a question regarding, I know your department came forward with some suggested funding levels and council reduced the funding levels. I have a question though about what happened to the risk mitigation pool. So that's question A. And the second part about the risk mitigation pool that I didn't see being funded here. It's my understanding that it has been successful with maybe some other private contacts, so, or contracts. So could you share a little bit more information about what happened to the risk mitigation pool and how was it chosen not to be included in this funding level?
So with the council's choice to fund only a portion of the Housing First Fund, staff consulted with Catholic Charities, and we decided that what we could do with partial funding was the landlord incentives, so the leasing bonuses and the rapid rehousing. If you want the risk mitigation fund, which is the insurance pool, that would require hiring of staff, which Catholic Charities is not able to do with partial funding. So with the $200,000, that gets you the leasing bonuses and rapid rehousing. Catholic Charities can utilize existing staff.
Okay. And then I know in the staff report it talked about some of the host outcomes where 118 people are housed through the second quarter. If you looked at the council's total investment in homeless services, have we housed more than 118 people through the second quarter?
Just through the host program? Those numbers, the 118 is specific to the host program. So I'd have to look at, if your question is all of our programs, I'd have to look at the other programs, say Family Support Center and Sam Jones Hall.
So do you have a ballpark idea? And where I'm still trying to get at, like as I've asked in previous, the rate of our return on our investment. What we're talking about here, I really appreciate having that concrete number of 118 people housed through the second quarter. But I also think that we're housing more people than that, given the investment strategy that we've been following.
We are, and so I haven't looked at the numbers for Family Support Center recently, but I was looking this morning at Sam Jones Hall. Through the second quarter, there were roughly 45 people that had been housed through the shelter. So it'll be even more for this Family Support Center because the rate of families exiting to shelter is typically higher than for a shelter for single adults.
Okay, great. And then I also remember when this was before us the last time, we were talking about, will this be presented to us during the budget process about, okay, if this is what we talked about before a couple months ago, dependent upon the budget situation, but will we be given the same type of a package as to, so that we could evaluate whether or not we want to continue in this investment?
So we'll start through a process. The April 17th will be a high-level conversation about the current fiscal condition of the city. We'll be asking council to give us some explicit direction. We have this particular direction already in consideration. It'll be coming back in the May version of the budget as we go through department by department and investment by investment. But we do need to get into this larger conversation about the fiscal condition of the city first, and then we will get into department, and it'll be part of that process, yes.
That is great, because my interest is just all the information that you provided us last time. We're not lost on that because we chose not to fully 100% fund it. I would like another opportunity to evaluate that, so thank you.
Other questions, Ms. Combs?
Thank you. I had mentioned that I did want to ask about 11.6. I saw that there were numbers provided. There's some data there. I had sent an email out asking for some specific data, and
is this in reference to the county's activities?
It is, and the host program works with that, so I consider
we've asked for those numbers from that information, council member. The lead at that location is the county. We are working on gathering that information from the county so we can supply that to the entire council, yes.
Okay, it's hard to make decisions about how we fund the host program without this kind of set of numbers that I've asked for, such as how many beds are there available, how many people have been placed from the encampment into, since the navigation center was set up.
And we understand that it's still a fragmented system. There are two operators operating with host, and so we're asking for numbers from the county so that we can supply that to you. Absolutely, we understand the frustration. Staff is equally frustrated that there's dual contracts and dual operating methodologies at work here.
I'm also asking, have also asked for those not eligible for services at Sam Jones, for numbers for those individuals, and what we're offering for those who, for a variety of reasons, feel that Sam Jones is not an appropriate placement for them. At least to know how many there are and if the city or the county has a plan for them. So I think you've seen the note, but I wanted to be sure to be clear that as we move forward discussing this, I would very much like us to fund more dollars. I'd like us to fund more dollars specific for housing and for rapid rehousing, but I have trouble doing that without having the numbers of how we're doing on placing folks. Thanks.
Council, are there further questions on the consent calendar? I have one card. Dwayne DeWitt.
Sir. Hello, my name is Dwayne DeWitt. I'm from Roseland. And in Roseland, we happen to have perhaps one of the largest homeless encampments in the county right now. And those people are having difficulty. In this rainy season, it's a really sad state of affairs. Now, I understand that the city's doing as much as it can in some ways, but I believe there's actually some more ways in which you could do something helpful. As I had mentioned earlier, there are containers that have been adapted for human habitation over in the Roseland area. They could be put out at the Naval Air Station. It's been said that a radio station, KBBF, has been trying to negotiate with the city because they have a financial difficulty where a lien has been placed against their property by the city, and that property is near the Sam Jones Hall. So I came to ask that hopefully you folks could look deeply into that idea that they have of allowing their land to be used to site non-traditional housing, to site some adapted containers, some mobile homes, some other ways to keep people dry in and out of this wet weather. It's just humane. I'm a respiratory therapist. I'm not a guy that wants to spend my time in meetings. I believe in doing the most we can for people's health and avoiding them having to be hospitalized where it costs far more to try to take care of them if we'd have just given them shelter from the storm in the first place. So please, look into this. I know you probably think, oh, we got everything going, but it sure doesn't seem to all those people I see standing along the buildings out here in and out of the rain. They haven't been able to get into the homeless encampment. They haven't been able to get into Sam Jones Hall. There are people out under the overpasses again. These are difficult times, I know, and it's not just because of the fire, but there are a lot of people who are really hurting right now, and I'm hoping that you folks will take the humane approach to think outside of the box and do something besides just work with Catholic Charities. Work with KBBF and others that want to see people saved from these really difficult times. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. We'll move on to, I'm sorry, we need to vote on the consent calendar. Mr. Rogers.
May I speak?
I don't have a card for you, Thomas. Okay,
Sorry,
go ahead.
forgive me. I spoke last week. I believe it should be a consent calendar item. If it's not, then I do apologize. This has to do with the districts, bonding districts. Is that on the consent calendar this week? Shouldn't it be an ordinance that would be followed up with a second reading?
I'm not sure. The city attorney is nodding.
The
yes.
community benefit district is on.
The community benefit district. Yes, it is on the consent calendar. Go ahead, Thomas.
Yes, okay, it is on the consent calendar, thank you. So in my research to look that up and remind myself, I did not find that it was 30% anywhere in the state enabling statute. I only found that it was a modification that was made in San Francisco only, regarding 30%. So in the state statute, it was 50% was required in that, in those, either an election form as a ballot or as a proposal by property owners owning 50% or more of the assessed value, or it could be a vote of people of 50% or more of the people. Typically in 1911, 1950, 1917 Act bonds, that's the way it is. In this particular 1994 statute, it didn't necessarily reflect voter participation, but it was 50% of the assessed valuation. And the other thing that I noted was that it would allow marketing and in a broad-based program, which would be continual or annual without termination. So there'd be a tax without termination, and the effect of the marketing would be to market the properties. It's possible to market the properties within the district rather than, that is, the statute here was would allow marketing of the properties. The state statute, the difference being a charter city, but the point is the state statute would essentially follow the guidelines of bonded districts, which allows marketing of the bonds only. The purpose of the payment is for marketing the bonds and not an ongoing annual offering and marketing of the properties within the district. I don't know who that would pay, how that would be paid, how would anyone assign what would be the benefit, what would be the benefit, how would you get specific benefit. It's very hard to do that in any way. So it's rather open, and there are several provisions that are open that way. I would recommend that you not approve that at this time until you can get that a little closer or look at it later in a way that's very specific. Thank you.
Thank you. That's all the cards I have. Mr. Rogers.
I will move items 11.1 through 11.8 and waive further reading of the text.
Second.
Council, your votes. That has 6 ayes with Mr. Tibbetts stepping away. Moving on to public comment. Ms. Gomez, do you have some cards for public comment for items not on the agenda? Thank you. Start with Dwayne DeWitt, followed by Mio Villa Gomez.
I'd like to use the overhead. Hello, I'd like to invite, my name is Dwayne DeWitt, I'm from Roseland. I'd like to invite all of you to the Welcome Home Veterans Day. The state of California actually has a state holiday called Welcome Home Veterans on the 30th of March. And it was put together by a Vietnam veteran named Jose Ramos from the Southland. And this year, we're having this celebration over at Howarth Park on Saturday the 31st. And any of you that could come by between 1 and 4 would be an excellent opportunity to talk to some good people. I'd also like to talk with you about Roseland Adventures. This book, it's 20 years old. You probably recognize that bottom picture. And what we don't want to see over in Roseland is a sprawl type of approach, which is apparently what's going to happen with the Roseland Specific Plan, pushing things way out to the south. People up along Sebastopol Road wouldn't mind this type of situation like 4th Street here in Santa Rosa. People are comfortable with that type of tighter building, and they look at it like, hey, this is a good way that you could have positive things in that 2-mile-long Sebastopol Road corridor. So in the district maps, things that's going on, this is how that looks right up in there. Sebastopol Road, there's all this land, and it's a positive area where you could have taller buildings, 2-, 3-, 4-story buildings. People would really enjoy it. Now, one of the things that I wanted to focus in on is getting more public involvement from Roseland. This is from 14 years ago, actually, and it pointed out how you were doing the new community advisory board and you were getting people from different parts of the town. And those people are no longer involved, only 1 or 2. Ms. Banuelos is still involved. And over in Roseland, back when this was put together, this was back in 95. I'd showed you this in the past. I was pushing about how we needed to have a way in which Roseland could have a voice. And so that's part of what this district elections approach is, that there would be a voice from Roseland. And the city had made the county island, and they had basically put this situation together. And the thing about Roseland residents wanting some respect in the whole process is what's really important. So here you have this map. This is Roseland. And for 25 years before this was even happening, people were talking about, hey, we needed to get a better approach with the city and work with us on where we're going forward. There was a really cool dude here. He pointed out, Mr. Schwab, he was the old czar of the Southwest for the planning district. He pointed out greedy people have pushed the program. What I'd like to say is I won't be running for city council. I'm going to be trying to help the Latina that comes out of Roseland to get elected so that they have a voice and we move forward and make it the best possible place in all of Sonoma County, not just Santa Rosa. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Is it Mio Villagomez, followed by Peter Strider? Scheidler?
Thank you, sir.
Two respiratory therapists in one room. As somebody has an asthma attack, you're covered. I was actually kind of shocked by the Bodine discussion.
Can you be a little closer?
Oh,
to that
I beg your
microphone,
pardon. I
please?
was kind of shocked by the Bodine discussion. It sounds like it's a company that doesn't really want to pay attention to the permitting process. Oh, thank you. I wonder where that was coming from. It sounds like a company that really doesn't want to pay attention to the permitting process. I have a duplex out in West County, and I have a retaining wall that the posts are 4 feet above the ground. The permit says if you have a post that high, you have to have it 8 feet underneath the ground in order to support the weight of the retaining wall. Well, I decided I only want to put it 2 feet above. What would happen in that situation with the permitting process? I mean, would that be allowed? I mean, would I be able to continue working with a retaining wall with the foundation half of the permitted desired depth and still just be allowed to go on for a year building it? I just kind of wonder. I mean, and this discussion of Bodine put the homeless issue in Roseland kind of in the front of my head. And this is kind of really what I wanted to talk about. I just want to mention to the council, these are very disadvantaged people. I know you know that. And my only request for them, I mean, it looks like Bodine has been, been bent over backwards, non-complying with permitting for a long, long time. And we can treat the homeless with some grace and kindness. I think it would be, it would come back on us in a really positive way. Thank you.
Thank you. Is it Peters? I'm sorry, Scheidler? Yes. Sorry about that. You'll be followed by Elizabeth Neeland.
I'm not sure how this works.
The clerk will help you. Hold on just a sec.
Oh, before I break it. Well, good afternoon, esteemed council members. My name is Peter Scheidler, and I've been selling real estate in Santa Rosa for 30 years. And I have 2 reasons for speaking today. The first reason is to suggest a building technology that is a fireproof alternative for the homes we're replacing after the firestorms. The second reason is to get your suggestions on how we could create a forum with the heads of the departments that are involved in the rebuilding process and the experts of this technology. The conditions that created the October firestorms are not going away, and the current patterns of climate change, the experts are predicting the frequency of our firestorms will increase. And as you know, our fire codes are inadequate when facing the power of the devastating power of the Sonoma County firestorms. The codes were updated in 2008. In 2008, 22 homes were built in Fountain Grove. Of the 22 homes built with the new fire codes, 21 burned to the ground. Clearly, this is not acceptable. Now for the good news. There is an alternative to consider. For the past 30 years, there's been a building technology used in residential and apartment construction in the U.S. called ICF, which stands for Insulated Concrete forms. ICF structures are certified by the ICC as non-combustible, which is to say they're fireproof. In addition to providing safety and survivability in fires and earthquakes, ICF homes are termite-proof and mold-proof. ICF homes have a net zero energy rating, which means an 80% reduction in energy use. The insurance costs for ICF homes are 40 to 50% less than stick-built homes. And ICF homes can be built to replicate any existing home or can be built to any architectural plan. And finally, because of efficiencies in design, material, and labor, ICF homes and apartments are competitively priced with stick-built homes. As elected members of the Santa Rosa City Council, along with real estate professionals, I feel we have a duty to examine this technology's track record of saving lives and avoiding the massive destruction of property in disaster zones. And the obvious question is, does it make sense to rebuild our neighbor homes with homes that will burn to the ground in the next firestorm? And my question is, how can we set up a meeting with department heads, council members, and the experts of ICF technology to see how ICF can be used to save lives and properties in the next firestorm?
Thank you, Mr. Scheidler.
Okay, I have a handout for you.
You can give it to the clerk.
Leave it with her, okay.
Elizabeth Nealon, followed by Arlie Haig.
Oh, someone tall has preceded me. Okay. Good afternoon. I was here last week because the last payphone in the transit mall had stopped working. I eventually talked to the transit service representatives, of which we seem to have 3 and sometimes some substitutes. And after several days, we got an out of order sign put on them. And then I actually talked to one of the representatives today, and they said that the people that own the company had come through and taken out one of the bad ones and made one of the bad ones work. So there's still one out of order sign. So yeah, it would be really sad not to have landlines, public landlines in downtown Santa Rosa. I personally, of course, leave my cell phone at home, love to use the landlines myself. So the subject of the transit service representatives is a subject unto itself. And I really like the 3 that we do have, but it does seem like it's rather a meager staff for a 7-day week at the transit mall. The main thing on my mind today is the bathrooms at the transit mall, which I have never spoken about publicly, I don't think, but they're not available for the Golden Gate transit buses. The Golden Gate runs till about midnight, and the situation we have with our bathrooms is they're open from about 6:30 to 7:30, 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday. And Sunday they open late. I don't know what time they open, maybe 10, when the buses start running, right? And then they probably close early because the buses stop at 4 on Sundays, the city buses. So my thought is that there should be a bathroom service there whenever there's buses running, especially like buses coming from San Francisco that arrive here, say, at 10:30 or 11:30 at night. Some people have been on the bus for 2 entire hours, or it could be longer, but nonetheless, having a bathroom available, there's no other businesses open at that hour that have bathrooms available, so that's an interesting thing. I don't have any other real subjects on my mind tonight. I think they gave me an extra minute. I don't know why, because I was watching my little thing there, and it was over 3 minutes, so we usually start off with 3 minutes. I don't know.
There's no
technology. What?
No requirement to use it all.
Of course not. And I don't have much on my mind tonight except just like keeping the transit mall looking good. Thanks.
Thank you. Arlie Haig, followed by Scott Wagner.
Good evening, Council and City Manager. I want to carry on the long-standing tradition of random suggestions and ideas, but I hope mine can have action. I've encountered a number of social media sites where people are having great difficulty paying for the garbage service, the waste management service. And I see that in the city code 912.010 FFF, it says single-family dwellings service unit means any dwelling unit in the service area utilizing a garbage cart or any combination of dwelling units sharing garbage carts for the accumulation and set out of residential solid waste. And my idea is that, as we are doing in the county that I live in, pocket of the city, pocket of county in the city, sharing 3 residences with, well, there's 2. I don't have garbage, I just have recycle. But we need to know if this code could cover 2 or more neighbors within the city sharing garbage service. And I've done a little bit of research for other parts of the country that do this, and there are garbage services who are more amenable to such arrangements, but I haven't seen anything on Recology's site for this. I know that multiple family dwelling units do have shared service because they have one big dumpster or whatever, but the problem is that the requirement that single family units in the city have to have disposal service is preventing the sharing, as far as I can tell. So can you do something about that? Thanks.
Thank you. Scott Wagner, followed by David Harris.
Good evening, folks. A couple things just related to the activities of the last couple of weeks. We had a demand letter that was sent across your bow recently, and the city is famous among a very small circle of activists for not doing anything about it. The county is coming in good faith and talking and trying to sort out what's going on, but the demand letter is basically saying, on constitutional grounds, you don't have the right to do what you normally do here. As city council members, you don't have the right to decide that you can kick people out of places where they live when they don't have any other options to be somewhere else. And that concerns me. I mean, it's almost as if we're watching this kind of slow motion morality play happen where ultimately the law is being forced to decide for you that you've got to act in some kind of responsible way for these people. And it concerns me. I mean, I feel like I know you all well enough individually, and we're caught in this political process somehow that impedes common sense from occurring. Let me just repeat at the risk and beyond the risk of being redundant. People have to have a legal place to put their head. It's simply a requirement. And the way that things are written right now in the statutes locally, but also in the sense of this evictions coming up, is that people are not allowed to have a legal place to put their head at the end of the day. I don't know what we do with that. I know that we need to take steps, so we certainly have lots of recommendations for what to do about it. But we're waiting for you to do something about it on your terms, whatever that means. And yet, here's another week where we don't have an agenda item. We're not discussing something that probably something like a quarter of the public commenters speak about. We are deliberately hushing, and the the Board of Supervisors is doing the same thing, deliberately hushing this point. And I don't think that you're hoping it's going away, but I don't understand exactly what the strategy is with regard to just completely ignoring the point and making sure that we don't have public discussion around this very difficult, financially annoying situation. So I guess I'm just here again to just kind of quietly ping on the point the way many speakers have. And I hope that we can somehow break through this political Chinese wall that's occurring to some semblance of common sense. And I'm also hoping that we'll see speaking occur in public about this among you. Thank you.
David Harris. Is David here? I saw him earlier. It may be. Okay, we'll move on to item 13.1.
13.1, report U.S. Highway 101 Bicycle and Pedestrian Bridge Additional Alternative Evaluation. Chris Katbagan, Associate Engineer, presenting.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Corsi and council members. Chris Katbagan with the Department of Transportation and Public Works. This is Stephen Grover, the lead project architect for BKF Engineering Consulting Team. In fact, I have some principal engineers in this room, Natalina Bernardi and Gordon Sweet.
Chris, you're going to have to get close to that microphone.
Oh, of course.
Thank you.
So I'd like to introduce the recommendation by the Transportation and Public Works Department that the council by resolution approve amendment number 1 to the project work order with BKF engineers for the U.S. Highway 101 Bicycle and Pedestrian Bridge project report and environmental documentation, PAED, to evaluate an additional project location, the Range Avenue Bear Cub Way alignment, increasing the contract amount by $379,344. So the development of a bicycle pedestrian bridge would connect and close a significant gap in the transportation network for bicyclists and pedestrians in the northern half of Santa Rosa. This bike ped bridge has been pursued by council since 2007. Back in 2010, the Santa Rosa Bicycle and Pedestrian Bridge feasibility study was completed and accepted by council. And through a resolution, council directed staff to develop project initiation documents with Caltrans and to focus on the Edwards Elliott Bridge alignment due to the relocation of the Guerneville Smart Station. The city's 2010 Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan actually listed the this bike ped bridge, as the highest priority for both bicycle and pedestrian projects in the city. In December 2016, the city and Caltrans actually completed the PID, which was based on the Edwards and Elliott Bridge alignment location. So currently the city is in the project approval environmental document phase with Caltrans to obtain environmental clearance. In June 2017, BKF began the PAD phase for the Edwards and Elliott Bridge alignment. During that time, staff with the Santa Rosa Junior College executives, during that time, staff has actually met with Santa Rosa Junior College executives on multiple occasions. In addition, there has been new developments in terms of building that has occurred in the Range Avenue area. And today, the SRJC is actually interested in working with the city to find the best bridge location. In fact, their general campus plan identifies more than one potential bridge location. As of now, SRJC is open to discussion about relinquishing right-of-way if needed to make this project a reality. So what you're seeing on the screen is an area where multiple early feasible feasibility studies that have been conducted. Santa Rosa Junior College is to the east. To the west is Coddingtown. You can see Edwards Avenue, Elliott Avenue to the north, and Range Avenue and Bear Cub Way onto the south. Caltrans wants all viable alternatives explored, which would include the location at Range Avenue, Bear Cub Way that could potentially have lower environmental impacts. The scope of BKF's work is currently focused on the crossing location at Edwards and Elliott as recommended in the PID. However, the recommendation from Caltrans and a renewed partnership with the SRJC has caused staff to recommend that the Range Avenue Bear Cub Way alignment be included as an alternative for the PAED phase with technical studies. And at this moment, I'd like to introduce Stephen Grover. Stephen Grover is one of the members of the consulting team, is familiar with the history and the amount of effort to take this project to this stage.
Thank you, Chris. I'll just take a few minutes and show you some slides about comparing the different locations. Compelling destinations on both sides of the freeway and the mile between both challenging crossings at Steele and College create the need for this project. As Chris mentioned, it may be advisable that the Range Bear Cub location be carried through the environmental phase in addition to the Edwards Elliott location. As you know, the existing land uses are quite different at the two locations. So following a few slides with the considerations of both locations, these include which types of users would be closest to the touchdowns on each side, functional considerations like connectivity and safety, impacts on existing uses, and cost and timeline to deliver a project. Each of the two locations has pros and cons, benefits, and impacts, and we think there is value in considering further assessment of more than one location. Here is one of the two alternative alignments that we carried through the project initiation document phase for the Edwards Elliott location. This location is walkable distance to the SRJC core campus area where the classrooms are. It's also a walkable distance to Coddingtown. The Edwards Elliott location, however, is built out. And as a result, the alignment, the best alignment that we were able to work out at this location winds its way over and around various constraints that would require right-of-way acquisition on both sides. There are some functional compromises that result, such as tight turns, landing on the west side in a loading zone, and a steeper ramp to accommodate parking lot access at Dick's Sporting Goods. Now, because this is an active transportation project, the connection to a smart station has long played a role in decision-making about the project. So just as taking that as one origin and thinking about the connection across the freeway starting from the smart station at Guerneville, the shortest route on public right-of-way to the Edwards side touchdown is shown here in yellow, and it would be via the new smart multi-use pathway. If you use private property, the shortest way to get from the smart station to the Edwards touchdown would be cutting through the Coddingtown Mall apartments area. Now, bicycle connections on both the east and west side to the touchdowns on the east and west sides would involve sharing the road with automobiles on these relatively quiet streets, either with bike lanes or sharrows. Shifting now to the Range Bear Cub location. This location is not as close to the Coddingtown or the SRJC core, but it is closer to new high-density residential neighborhood developments on the west side, as well as the SRJC playing fields and the high school on the east side. At this location, the bridge and approaches would follow a former railroad right-of-way. Unlike the Edwards Elliott location, the land needed to build a bridge here is relatively undeveloped. It's currently owned by SMART, SRJC, and some private owners, and right-of-way would also need to be acquired. But because this site is relatively unconstrained by existing development, the project would be significantly simpler to design and build and have gentler ramp slopes, better sight lines, and touchdown areas that would be free of mixing with automobiles. Looking again at what it would take to go from the SMART station across a bridge at the Range Bear Cub location, you would also follow the multi-use pathway along the SMART tracks. And then you would transition to this undeveloped area on the left-hand photo. So your trip from the SMART station would be all along vehicle-free Class 1 bicycle and pedestrian pathway. On the east side, you would land in what's currently an SRJC parking lot, and then cyclists would need to share Bear Cub roadway with vehicles, which is also a quiet street. As I mentioned earlier, both locations have pros and cons, benefits and impacts. The benefits and impacts of the Bear Cub location have not been as thoroughly evaluated as the Elliott Edwards location. This image shows you, it's a little bit counterintuitive, but if you use public right-of-way, the travel distances between the entrance to the SRJC and the SMART station are approximately equal. So in summary, comparing the two locations, here's a couple things that they have in common. As currently written, the purpose and needs statement for this project would be satisfied by either location, and both locations require right-of-way acquisition. In contrasting them, Edwards Elliott location is closer to Cottingtown and the SRJC core, while Range Bear Cub is closer to new residential developments on the west and playing fields in the high school on the east. Perhaps more importantly, Edwards Elliott is constrained by existing development. So as I mentioned, there are some functional and safety compromises due to geometric constraints. There's minimal open space available for construction staging, and there are more elements like a large number of utilities and a freeway sign that would need to be relocated. In contrast, the Range Bear Cub location is relatively unconstrained, so a structure would be simpler and easier to build there.
Thanks, Stephen, for providing a good understanding of the opportunity to evaluate a second location. In terms of analysis, the environmental review for the Range Avenue Bear Cub Way bridge alignment would provide additional technical studies. Caltrans recommends detailed evaluations of the Range Avenue Bear Cub Way alignment. The partnership with SRJC has evolved to something more optimistic, and the additional amount for BKF to evaluate the Range Avenue Bear Cub Way bridge alignment is $379,344, which would take it through the entire environmental process and preliminary design. So it is recommended by the Transportation and Public Works Department that Council, by resolution, approve Amendment Number 1 to Project Work Order Number A010119 2016-01 with BKF Engineers of Pleasanton, California for the U.S. Highway 101 Bicycle and Pedestrian Bridge Project report and environmental documentation to evaluate an additional project location, the Range Avenue Bear Cub Way alignment, increasing the contract amount by $379,344 for a total amount of $1,286,903. At this time, if you have any questions, the team would gladly answer them.
Council, are there questions? Mr. Sawyer.
Thank you, Mayor. One of the concerns that I have about the second alignment is who might be impacted, whether it be bicyclists or pedestrians. Would the study speak to people's use of the private access as well as public, cut through private property, in other words, through the apartment complex? Do they talk about those issues and the impacts on private property owners, or just public right away? Because I'm getting to a reality. If someone is going to, unless they've gated off, which maybe it is gated, I don't really know. The odds of people using only public right of way for access to the JC might be, the odds might be low that they only restrict themselves to public right of way. So the reality is they're going to wayfind perhaps through private property. Will that possible situation be analyzed in this study, or do they only deal with public right of way?
For the study, we would have to assume that the pedestrians and bicyclists will use public right of way, because we will not be signing them to use private right of way. The reality is, if it's an open space, they may cut through there.
Mm-hmm.
But for our assumption in terms of the study, it's along public right of way. Does that answer your question?
It does, actually, because it is one of my concerns, and I guess the only way to really find out who would actually be using this particular path, is it because of what appears to be something a little bit circuitous? Is this going to advantage bicyclists over pedestrians? Are the pedestrians going to use one path where the bicyclists might use another? And it sounds as though this particular study won't address people wayfinding through private property.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, Council? Mr. Tibbetts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilman Sawyer, I think you know us young people too well. When I saw that, I thought to myself, boy, I'm going to be skateboarding through that apartment pretty soon. And I say that a little bit, facetiously, but I think that is a real reality that you have to assume is going to take place. So either ongoing communication with that property owner needs to take place. But one question I had is, I guess I'm missing why Caltrans recommends the detailed evaluation of Range Ave and Bear Cub Way. And, I'm just understanding the financial outlook. I mean, just earlier we passed up $100,000 for homeless services, and understandably so, given the outlook. Why are we looking at an additional $374 when we actually looks like we have another study of the Elliott Way funded?
Again, through the corporation of SRJC, meeting with them multiple times, the conversation has changed. They're a willing partner. So when Caltrans wants to explore all viable options, that relationship has changed. And so now we do want to cover, the impacts. And
so this is at the Bear Cub Way is Santa Rosa Junior College's preferred route, and they're asking us to...
It's not preferred. They're open to exploring it. And when I say they, the SRJC.
Councilmember Tibbetts, if I could step in as well. So Caltrans is the entity that's going to be reviewing the document. They'll ultimately be assisting us in the approval process. It's their recommendation that you have more than one alternative when you're doing an alternatives analysis. So generally speaking, when you're doing an environmental document, you have 3 different alternatives. There's a no project alternative, there's a preferred alternative, and then there's something to compare the preferred alternative to. In this particular case, we were only proposing a single alternative and the no project in an effort, well, quite frankly, because we had gotten to a point where the direction was Edwards and Elliott because we didn't have willing partnerships adjacent to us. As we've been evaluating this proposal, the junior college has opened up their interest. So we asked the consultant to determine if there were other alternatives that we should consider. As we worked through the process with Caltrans, Caltrans says not only should you look at another, we want you to review another alternative. Okay. Is it an absolute dead requirement? It's not a requirement. It is a recommendation by the state as they want to see as many alternatives reviewed as possible.
So if we don't provide that alternative, there's a good chance that they could deny the other route, and then we've incurred additional cost anyways, most likely, and additional time in this process?
They're going to be concerned that we didn't evaluate enough in order to determine what the preferred alternative would be.
Okay, that's the helpful answer I was looking for. Thank you, Director Nutt. The other question that I had too was pertaining to talks with the Santa Rosa Junior College. I've had the chance to speak with President Frank Chong, and I assume others of us up here have as well, about the inclusion of some sort of an electronic billboard to advertise JC and community programming. How does that interplay into, or is this out of the
That's
range
way
of
out
discussion?
realm of this
All right.
discussion.
Thanks.
Mr. Swedhelm.
Thank you. I just have one question. What's the source of the funds, the $379,000?
Well, those funds from the CIP budget, and so for other projects that aren't moving forward, we still have funds to shift it into this project.
They're basically gas tax funds.
Right. So this does not have an impact on our general fund.
It does not have an impact on the general fund. It'd be contained with other funding sources that you could fund this type of opportunity with. Typically, we have got gas tax, Measure M. Those are the two sources that we would traditionally use to make these types of improvements.
And what impact does this project have with our update of I think it's the 2010 Bike Pedestrian Master Plan? Is this a different path, or would that be included in that plan?
When it comes to the Bike and Ped Master Plan, I mean, really what it's saying is the bridge is the #1 priority. It's not necessarily stating a specific location for the bridge. It just wants to increase connectivity.
Great. Thank you for that clarification.
Ms. Combs.
Thank you, Mayor. I talked with my Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Board member prior to coming today. Can you just give us a summary of the response from the Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Board? Did they have questions? They had previously looked at the Elliott Avenue, and so I would really like you to sort of give us a clear statement about, did they vote on it? Tell me a little bit. I have an idea, but tell me a little bit about their conversation.
Hi, Nancy Adams with Transportation Public Works, and the board actually reviewed this project at their meeting last Thursday, the 15th, and they did have a few questions, and it was related more to circulation for pedestrians versus bicyclists.
Yes.
Yeah, and so the upshot of their conversation was that they did support the recommendation that's before the council this evening. It was a 4-1 vote with 5 members present. So they did have a little concern about spending the additional money, but to Director Nutt's comment about the Caltrans requiring us to look at another option, they saw that as a reasonable way to proceed forward. So.
Okay, and thank you for that, because my appointee also had a sense of being required by Caltrans to provide this alternative. And I just needed to understand if it felt required by Caltrans or if this was an option. So I'm going to ask a question that was sort of asked earlier. You might want to come back down. Exactly what happens if we don't choose to move the Bear Cub option forward? What happens? Do we know?
So we believe that Caltrans will still process our PAED. They will have questions about what alternatives may have been studied. They'll have questions about what the alternative conditions could have been. But they're not going to deny a PAED application that only includes the one primary alternative. So it is an option for council to not move forward with this. What Caltrans is saying is based on their program, they recommend having the 3 alternatives moving forward. Does it come in the form of a requirement or a strong recommendation? It's really a strong recommendation. They will not, as far as I know, see, Natalina's going to look at me a little bit.
I agree, but they are the simpler.
So the deal is they're not going to deny it. They're going to ask us lots of questions, and it may be a harder path for us to get through to justify why only a single alternative was.
We could sure use I just want to make, I hear you. I want to make it clear that while there may be $379,343 somewhere in some resource, not the general fund, we have a lot of road work and road improvements and other places to spend that money, particularly since the fires. So I'm really trying to understand the fine line between strong recommendation and required.
So please go ahead.
So can I caucus for staff for a second?
Thank you. I also am going to want to ask a question about slide 15, if you want to put that up.
Me too. Mr. Richards, did I hear you saying you can't hear? Okay, all right. I just wanted to make sure you were able to hear this meeting. Okay, all right.
He's got the loop system, and it works pretty well if you're in the mic. Yep. Thank you. That's nice to hear that we've got that one right.
Councilmember Combs after caucusing. Let me add a little piece to this.
Okay.
Part of the reason we're bringing this forward in light of all of the issues that we're facing as a city is the alternative alignment comes at a simpler cost of construction is our anticipation. And so what Mr. Grover was attempting to describe in a very brief way was the alignment that we've been working on for the last 8 years is complicated. It's complicated. It has a significant construction cost to it to focus around that. As we opened up the ability as we opened up the scope to incorporate alternatives, because of the JC's willingness to work with us, the Bear Cub alignment was one that they looked back and said, we may have an easier ability to build this. It may come at an easier cost, and it may be easier to construct. With that, that's why we felt as an alternative, along with Caltrans' requirement or recommendation that we have a second alternative, it was appropriate to bring to council at this point in time. We do recognize it's not our intention to try to shoehorn a project in a time where we know that funds could go in different places, but it was an opportunity for us at this point in time to bring this recommendation to you to look at an alternative project that may result in smaller long-term costs if this project were to proceed.
Do we have an estimate anywhere? I'm not seeing it. Perhaps it's in here and I missed it, but do we have an estimate of the difference in the costs? I'm actually a little concerned about the cost estimates because I'm still seeing numbers like 13 million when we know that there's been several similar bridges built in the Bay Area for around 6 million.
I would just, this is a word of caution on cost estimates right now. What we're hearing is cost estimates, unsurprisingly, in this environment that are being provided by engineers and cost estimators are way under actual construction costs at this point. So these are the information that we're actually learning, and this is one of those timing issues that we're discovering just last week, that we're hearing things like SCTA is getting wildly different estimates on their projects than they had anticipated. So even in light of this, I would say these are all legitimate questions, Council. This is one of those timing issues where staff's working really hard to address the community need, but your questions are really right on. And in addition, I would say I'm not sure we would be recommending this project in the short term anyway as a staff, even if we got through this process, because we have lots of needs that we're trying to get our hands around at this time. So I would just caution that any estimate that comes out right now, I wouldn't necessarily hold much value in that estimates. That's based on what we used to know. The fact is what we're learning is cost estimates are coming in as much as 50% higher for public works projects. That's what I'm hearing from around the area.
It uses steel, does it?
So, Councilmember Combs, couple of things. One, Mr. Grover is very well adept at this particular type of project and has a lot of experience at doing designs all the way through construction. And so I will let him have a chance to respond in detail. I did, in a prior council meeting, update and review other bridge projects that occurred here in and around our region, and found that this cost estimate for full construction cost actually is fairly accurate. And so I'll let Mr. Grover provide a little bit more details. But the last bridge that was built up here in North Bay was the Central Marin Ferry Connection. And it was actually a little bit shorter of a bridge, but it did come in with about the same overall cost as we're proposing here.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding me.
Yeah, so that one was about 12 million, I think, if I remember correctly. I'll just address your question in one way. Rather than in absolute value, I'll just say that I could see the difference in cost between these two locations being as much as 25%.
Okay. Okay, and I had asked to see slide 15. And I will say one of my primary concerns is pedestrians. And it does concern me that pedestrians are not well served going. My experience has been that people don't get off the SMART train and then go to the parking garage. It's not their usual path. So I'm a little puzzled at the location of the orange dot on the right-hand side. And my other experience is that on the junior college campus, bicyclists and pedestrians don't take Elliott Avenue to the parking garage. So I'm interested in where we're locating to measure to and from. I'm also interested that, well, I understand I have fellow colleagues who have questions about this same map. I may let them run with that. But I would like to see a comparison of pedestrian crossing from the SMART train to the center of the junior college. And I would like to see a comparison of that based on these two designs. I think that the Edwards Avenue, Elliott Avenue serves pedestrians much better. And I also think the likelihood that someone might choose to park at Cotting and come across serves Cottingtown well, that a conversation with them is in order. And that I would expect that people might, for example, go there for lunch or shop there before or after, or a variety of things, that is in fact an area that has more available parking than the neighborhood around the junior college has on the east side. And I believe people tend to come from the west side to get to the junior college. So that's of interest to me. But I'm going to I am concerned about whether or not we're planning that. So, okay, let me back up a step. One of the statements that you've made involves slide, I think, 14, which talks about sort of the availability of vacant land and hence more safety in an area for bear cub. If we build it, they will come. So I am concerned that what we're doing is maybe putting off the safety issue for a few years, but that these properties will not remain vacant as they are now over the long run. And I would be interested in seeing what our general plan calls for in those areas where Bear comes down on the west side. If we aren't greatly increasing property values and the desirability of housing in that area, I don't know. But I'd be interested in hearing that. Thank you.
Mr. Rogers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And if you could go back to slide 15, I'll be a little bit more blunt than my colleague. There's not a single pedestrian that is walking all the way up Elliott Avenue, down Mendocino Avenue, into the entrance and then to their classroom. So when we do this study, that's not really useful information to me on the traffic pattern.
So I just let me clarify. The consultants had to pick 2 points on a map, and this is not and we've had to explain this to the junior college a number of times. This is not a bridge for the junior college. This is a bridge for the general community coming from east and west parts of Santa Rosa. The junior college happens to be a stop along the way. So just in response to the 2 questions, the reason we didn't choose something internal inside the JC is that's not the end product, just like we didn't choose Coddingtown as the end product. It really is an east-west type of connection. The consultants chose an area out in front on Mendocino Avenue because that's where our east-west bicycle connections all come into. That section on McConnell, that's going to be turned into a hawk here fairly soon. That is going to be a hawk. It's a, in some cases, yes. It's a different type of flashing beacon that provides for a heightened sense of protective crossing for pedestrians and bicyclists. We've installed one over by Spring Lake Village on Montgomery Drive. They're very effective. We're starting to install them around town. So there is reason why that point was chosen. Yes, I agree, depending upon where you're going. I mean, I live up off of Steel Lane, off of Lewis. And so, no, I wouldn't come this way to get to the bridge either, but we had to choose something to provide a comparative. If you would prefer us to look at a different comparative, we'd be happy to. We're not trying to skew, this wasn't done in a way to skew the results. It was just pick 2 points and roll with it.
Excuse me, Mr. Nutt, I just think that in the future, it would be more helpful and probably more representative of reality if the mileage was measured from the east landing to the SMART station.
Fair enough. We'll be happy to make that adjustment.
And my concern is I just want to make sure when we get this study back that it's actually usable for us. And I think that it's pretty safe to say that a lot of this traffic is going to be to the JC. So I was concerned about the map not doing justice the actual distance that most of the people are going to be using or going if they use this. The other aspect that we haven't really discussed, and I completely agree, we're not building a pedestrian bike bridge just for the sake of building it. We're looking for the best location to have it, not just for the JC, but for the surrounding area. And if you go just north of the Edwards Elliott proposed crossing, you have an undercrossing for the freeway that is largely unusable for a lot of the public. And I've heard a lot about how unsafe people feel going through there. And the difference of dropping down to Edwards Avenue to come across versus dropping all the way down to come across where Range Avenue is, I think is a pretty significant deterrent for pedestrians specifically. Bikers not so much, but pedestrians especially when we talk about safety.
And I will say part of the reason we did this is we've heard the exact same on College Avenue as well. And so it's really both of those 2 undercrossings is determined as being less than appropriate for bicyclists and pedestrians. So the idea was to try to build something between those 2 specific areas. And that's why the study originally evaluated the entire length of the corridor to try to determine where the best possible solutions were. There are perks. So there are perks to the Edwards Elliott. Elliott is soon to be almost entirely owned by the junior college. That gives us some benefits. We have the ability and are talking with the junior college about closing down portions of the street so it's no longer through vehicular traffic. That's still in discussion. And to be honest, on the Bear Cub side, that is a private road. That is not a public right-of-way. And therefore, as we get into the PAED, we might find that this particular routing may not be feasible. And so those are some of the things that would come out as a part of this document that we just haven't authorized the consultants to dig into because, quite frankly, it's not in their scope of work at this point. But we may find that there are limitations to what that alignment is that we can't quite see today.
Yeah, and I appreciate that we're not, we're kind of de facto litigating where we want this to go in a discussion about just providing options. So I can appreciate that. I think that there is concern from members of the community that we're opening the door to something that has not been discussed or was actually pushed aside by past councils, and there's concern around that. I'm very weary of that. If we were to not move forward with adding in the analysis of this section right now, and we needed to do it down the road, would that increase the cost of it, or are there potential cost savings in doing it together?
Well, I don't want to answer necessarily on behalf of the consultant, but my gut feeling is if we're going to do it, now's the time to do it. But I'll certainly allow Natalina to chime in.
So I'd rather not negotiate right here, right now. I would say if you close a project, there are likely, we're talking about cost escalators down the road. Your costs, no matter what the consultant says to you right now, council member, I'm going to say, there are always advantages in expanding a current scope than going back and reopening a scope later on. Respecting the consultants here, I would say that's a concern. I think what's driving this conversation is the 25% cost differential, a very complicated project at the north end, and just affirming that that's the direction council wants us to proceed in. I have to tell you, I'm exceedingly uncomfortable taking additional monies at this time with the concerns we have as an organization and investing them in this project. But I want to make it clear that that could lead to 25, if we reach to, it's a much more expensive project, and it could be more expensive to do another analysis later on. We need to go forward with our eyes wide open. We're in a particular place we sit right now. I believe staff is looking for some direction. There are benefits to looking at other options, especially as you heard as it relates to potentially overall project costs, but those often come with a price that include not necessarily the ease of access or the other things that we're trying to be addressed. So we're in a place to ask a question. If you're comfortable with us proceeding in the current contract, staff can move on with the current contract. I think we're at one of those crossroads where there's so many unknowns, but we want to make sure that you're informed about those decisions and help us make some of those decisions in this case. So no matter what happens today, staff will be okay with that decisions, but we are concerned that the northern one is obviously a much more complicated project for build. And so we want to ask a question, make sure we get the right answer from council, and then we'll proceed.
Right, and I understand, Mr. City Manager, and I understand that it's a bit of a moving target to ask that question about cost, but quite frankly, when we're talking and saying multiple times that this project might get pushed down the road due to the fire anyway, it is a important question for me to try to get my head around in terms of whether or not all we're adding to this project is time or if there's substantial cost. And if that substantial cost is a barrier, I get that, but it sounds like we have some time before this project is going to be done. And if we go through and we save this $390,000-ish that we potentially are saving and get back a feasibility project study here that is actually going to work for us and get approved by Caltrans, it might be worth the additional time.
I would just throw one cause of hesitation about delaying the full project at this point. The next phase of the project is actual PS&E design. That has been funded through a grant. That grant comes forward in 1920 We could potentially push it one more year, but we wouldn't be able to push it much beyond that. So this process has to be completed with a certified environmental document before we enter into the PS&E phase. So that's just a caution of this specific timeline in order to maintain the OBAG funds that we've received to do the overall design process. Okay. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to move forward with this alternative, but it does mean the project itself we would like to proceed with.
Mr. Tibbetts had another question, and then, okay, Ms. Combs. Yeah. Pardon? I have a couple questions. First of all, it's been reported that Dick's Sporting Goods is pushing back against the landing close to their property or on their property on the west side of the freeway. And I just need to ask the question, has that been taken into consideration as we go through this? Is there any part of this that is because of that pushback?
It is not a primary factor, but it is a factor. Something to consider that the letter of messaging we've received from the property owner there could cause us to go into additional actions to acquire the appropriate right-of-way needed to build the landing at that location. What that does, as we've discussed, it adds to the level of complexity of that specific crossing. Is it a deterrent? Not necessarily. It's just another factor that we need to take into consideration. Would that be a rationale for council to make the decision to look at the alternative? I would not say that that would be a primary rationale. It's just something that we wanted to make you aware of because it is a factor that we understand is going to further complicate the Edwards-Elliott alignment.
On the western landing and approach on the Bear Cub Way alignment, that is that Smart's property, the former railroad right-of-way that was referred to as vacant land?
Actually, it is privately owned by, I believe, Myers Kitchen for a portion of it, Myers Kitchen Supply, and I'm not sure who owns the other piece. Once you cross range, it's owned by Smart.
On the west side of range?
Correct.
Is the property east of range, between range and the freeway, is that like a 30-foot right-of-way?
Do you know who owns that piece of land that comes all the way across?
It's about 100, I believe.
100? Okay.
It's the same property for Myers. Oh, okay, that's all Myers Kitchen Supply all the way up to range. They purchased that old right-of-way piece. I couldn't remember if it was segregated into two pieces or not, so I apologize.
Okay, thank you. If there aren't any other questions, Mr. Sawyer.
I'm going to ask you, Mr. Nutt, to talk about another factor. And a couple of times it's been mentioned that the JC is currently, and this was not always the case, a little more willing to talk about this very difficult and complex project. Is the, if we were to move away from the Bear Cub Way, which does not slip off the tongue easily, alternative, would that, I'm going to ask you to speculate here, could that cooperative attitude be compromised if we moved away from this alternative?
No. So the junior college, so part of the reason we ended up with an Edwards-Elliott alignment as the junior college was an unwilling participant. We had to find an area where we could legitimately bring down the landing from the bridge, so we used our own right-of-way to accomplish that. There wasn't another alignment that really gave us that level of flexibility. Now that the JC has expressed a willingness to work with us, that sort of opened some of the possibilities. We've talked at length with a couple of their different committees. I'm willing to state that I think Edwards and Elliott is their preferred alternative, but they are willing to discuss a Bear Cub alignment because they know that that could be as good of an alternative for connecting east and west of the freeway. So
interesting. Thank you.
Ms. Combs.
Thank you, Mayor. So following up on that, some of the difficulties on the configuration of the Elliott Avenue side landing had to do with constraints we had because of the property. It has some interesting and, if I may say so, attractive shape that will probably increase the cost. If the junior college is now interested in being a partner, does in fact the Edwards-Elliott Bridge cost the same amount or cost as much more as we're thinking? Or can we explore with the junior college a lower cost landing on the Elliott Avenue side?
So I will.
Perhaps there's a bunch of assumptions there that are not accurate,
So I'll ask Stephen or Natalina to chime in here in a second, but the bottom line is we do get to adjust that curly Q, that corkscrew alignment into something that's more traditional, because they are willing to talk with us about utilizing some of the frontages along Elliott that might improve the project cost.
So looking at slide 7. Can we, if we could in some way straighten this out by working with the junior college, would that bring the cost? Is that where the 25% cost increase is, or can we get closer by doing that?
Short answer is I think you can improve some of the geometric functional compromises, compared to what would be best practices, but I don't think it would have a significant impact on the bottom line cost of the project.
So you don't think that we could build a comparable bridge at this end as we can at the Bear Cub end?
Well, here you'd still be winding through complicated terrain with utilities and freeway signs, and at the other location you would not be doing that in any case. The cost of the approaches would be mostly proportional to the square footage of the approaches and not to whether they're curving or straight.
Okay, and does that take into account also, and that's a surprise to me because I thought curving would cost quite a bit more. Does that cost differential take into account the right-of-way costs that will be different in the two projects?
We're trying to take that into account. At this point, these are all rough estimates.
And these are all of these questions actually are things that would be specifically answered as a part of the PA and ED. So that's why we don't have comprehensive responses, is because we haven't done all of those detailed analysis.
Right. I thought we had an agreement ahead of time with Dick's that when the sporting goods was built there, that we had some kind of agreement with them. My understanding was that's one of the reasons why there's a bicycle-like mural on that side of the building, was because they understood that this was a likely location for the landing of the bridge. Did we not have that kind of an agreement? I thought I heard in one of the other answers a kind of response that Dick's might complicate things.
Well, there's agreement and then there's acknowledgement. They understand that the bridge has intended to go there. I don't believe there's actually an agreement that has established some right of the city to be there. We have to acquire property from Dick's.
Yes, and I would suggest that any potential dispute or lack of agreement with Dick's or agreement not be a topic for us to discuss in open session this evening.
Thank you.
I will also add that in the meantime, the property's changed hands. It's no longer owned by Cottingtown. So that has altered the condition as well.
If theoretically there had been, this is closed session.
If the council doesn't have any more questions, we'll go to public comment. Dwayne DeWitt, did he leave? Ann Seeley, and will be followed by Willard Richards.
Good evening, Council, Mayor and Council. Ann Seeley speaking for Concerned Citizens for Santa Rosa. This is a complicated matter. The fundamental important thing here is that we get this connection built. It is incredibly important that we have this transportation availability for the purposes not only of facilitating transportation, but of making housing on the west side of the freeway available for everybody on the east side, including JC students who famously have difficulties with housing. I arrived planning to say that I haven't seen any compelling reasons why we should consider the other alignment. Since I've listened, I've heard, one, that Caltrans is requiring it, and that is a really tough thing. You know, if Caltrans says jump, then maybe you have to jump. I do think that the route, though, that the Bear Cub alignment takes is amazingly longer than this northerly alignment and might tend to attract fewer users. Whatever we're doing, we all are aware, I'm sure, of the failure of the bridge in Miami and want to make sure this is done right. Please just build the project. Thank you.
Thank you. Willard Richards. He'll be followed by Jack Swearingen.
Mayor Corsi and council members, my name is Willard Richards. First off, I'd like to again give my thanks to the people who designed and installed the hearing aid loop in this auditorium. Your microphones convert sound into an electrical signal, and that electrical signal is converted back into sound for the first time right in my ears. So I don't hear the room reverberation, the imperfections of the speaker that prevents feedback and all of that. So, but the downside is I can't hear somebody trying to talk to me during the meeting. I'm a strong supporter of this bridge. We're in the era where we're trying to get people out of cars onto bicycles, public transportation, pedestrian, and this is a key element of the city infrastructure to make that happen. I'm a little bit puzzled that the city scheduled a public meeting to get public input on this after this council meeting. It would seem to be useful to have that public input before you make the decisions you're about to make. The council has already done a very good job of picking up on the concerns that I had in mind talking about. Both alignments require the acquisition of private property. Back in the days when SMART thought it could do more than it ended up being able to do with its funding, it was negotiating with the apartment complex next to the SMART station about possibly doing some parking swaps. And so I would strongly encourage the planners to talk with the apartment to see whether or not pedestrian access down through the parking area right out to Range Avenue could be arranged. I do like with the Bear Cub alignment the possibility of having Class 1 bicycle path all the way, so that there are trade-offs. But most of all, I hope this project moves forward quickly and the bridge gets built as soon as possible. And it is somewhat a source of dismay that this is not the first study, not the last study, and it'll cost $1.3 million. Thank you.
Thank you. Jack Swearingen, followed by David Harris.
Good evening, Mayor Corsi and council and friends, all friends. This is called the Bicycle and Pedestrian Bridge. By the way, I'm speaking as Friends of Smart here. This is called the Bicycle and Pedestrian Bridge. My view is if we relocate the bridge to the Bear Cub Way alignment, we're basically eliminating the P from the bridge. It now becomes a bicycle bridge because pedestrians just simply aren't going to use it, as has been pointed out by several of you. The Edwards to Elliott alignment will service both bicycles on the east-west bikeway and pedestrians from Smart and Cottingtown parking lot, which would benefit from the JC, Cotting, and Smart, would benefit all three of those. Bicycles only will benefit at the southern alignment, at the edge of the JC. And so we have to ask ourselves, is this a bike pedestrian bridge or just a bike bridge? That's the core issue that we're grappling with. What has happened to the Edwards-Elliott alignment, which until now was acceptable to all the stakeholders, possibly with the exception of Dix, who accepted the conditions put on their permit, somewhat grudgingly, but they accepted it. And what's happened since? Well, it seems that the issue has come from the Department of Transportation and Public Works, not the JC and not Caltrans. And their issue may be cost-driven, but to scare us by saying Caltrans might not like it is not quite straightforward. When the initial came from them, and I saw 4 years ago, or maybe 5, I saw 3 different alignments for this bridge studied by Mr. Grover and company. So why now suddenly we have to look at another one when they were looked at carefully before? So in summary, don't throw by a pedestrian off of the title of this bridge or its function. And I submit to you that $380,000 is a lot of money to spend on a study whose entire premise is questionable. Thank you.
Thank you. David Harris, followed by Thomas Ells.
Good evening, Mayor Corsi, members of the council, and everybody else in this audience. This is a topic that I can remember 14, 15 years ago. We've been talking on this topic, and I'm realizing how time goes by. We're all hearing about how the time has passed now. I mean, we're at an anniversary of when Reagan said, Mr. Gorbachev, tear down that wall. To me, 101 is the Berlin Wall of Santa Rosa, and we need more than one overcrossing. And so I would urge you to think out into the future, because in another 15 years, if we're back here again, I'll be up in age like my friends, Drs. Richards and Swearingen, and we should have more than one overcrossing done by then, I hope. And I would suggest that this $380,000, rather than being spent on Bear Cub, be spent up between the county admin and the west side of 101. We should have a future with at least 4 of these overcrossings over our Berlin Wall. So I would urge you to not spend this money on this round. Spend it on something more useful that we need in the long run. Thank you.
Thank you. Thomas Ells, followed by Peter Chernoff.
Thank you. I'm going to take us back a few years, a few more years than these gentlemen here. Over 20 years ago, I was part of LSR 15, and we analyzed the Range Road Bear Cub alignment for addition of apartments and the change of zoning in that area. And so that was extremely examined. We had several architects come and facilitate multiple rounds within the LSR regarding analysis of that area, again, to change the zoning. We had Sharon Wright was actually the president or whatever of the chamber, and she was also mayor at the time, and she was the head of the LSR group. It was analyzed extensively, as Jack was mentioning, there were multiple alignments, and this is 20 years we've been looking at these. This is the preferred alignment, Elliott and Elliott and Edwards. It's always been, and that's why the main reason was his connections to SMART. The main danger at Guerneville is the freeway off-ramp and on-ramp, the northbound off-ramp and the southbound on-ramp at Guerneville. Very dangerous, and they get bicycle riders going the wrong direction. And it's really bad. People are looking this way to see traffic and so on, and the bicycle riders are coming this way. They're looking another way because they're looking at traffic coming across from south and making turns and so on, and they're trying to go on ramp to the south, and here's a bicycle rider or something like that. This is going to take that away. They're not going to go further south because of the angle of the Bear Cub and range that goes too far south. Again, you can have with regard to CEQA or any study overriding considerations. These are both overriding considerations: the danger at Guerneville and the SMART train access to have pedestrians. Because for the first point, the high school, there will be people who go from the high school, but that high school has several thousand students, and the junior college has 20,000 students. It's 10 times more people are accessing there, and the traffic is just horrendous. Try to go over there and park. You cannot park. People drive around. People leave the school because they can't park. They don't go to enough classes, and they're dropped out. Public Works projects right now, trucking is centric to Public Works. Right now, the costs of trucking are impacted by the debris removals, and this ends essentially immediately. They need to have origin and destination studies of where these people are coming. We've looked at all these. SMART Train, that was the 2-county study that did that. General plan alignment put Dick's Sporting Goods on public notice that the property to those property owners of the necessity for the construction placement adjacent to their property. This public notice in the general plan,
Thank
so
you,
they
Thomas.
knew all about the alignment.
Thank you. Peter Cherneff.
Good to see everybody's smiling faces. And it's a beautiful day. We need the rain, you know. And of course, we know the more rain we get, the more Jerry Brown will say we're in a drought, but that's all right. We know better. Let's outlaw cars in Santa Rosa and have bicycles and horses. And one way to start doing that is have a city tax, put $2 or $3 per gallon tax that goes to the city for take care of things like the homeless issue. Just raise it up. Let's get creative. Horses and buggies and bicycles, excellent idea. And a bridge, well, we got to make sure that Caltrans does not use the same contractor that was just used down in Florida, of course. We know that one. I mean, what in the world is that all about? Jiminy crickets. And and maybe we want to just have American steel and steel bolts as opposed to what's going on with the Bay Bridge, which is going to get knocked down probably very soon. The first earthquake will be within a breath of this full moon. So we need a bridge that's going to be earthquake proof. That's for sure. And this full moon, the first of the 2 earthquakes, absolutely will be coming. One of them will knock down the Bay Bridge. But the bicycle thing, I encourage you to use engineers that are local. And don't contract out to the lowest bidder. I mean, how well has that worked? Let's use some American ingenuity. So I want to say I think this is a great idea. I hope that this is pursued and accomplished sooner than later. And the thing about raising the taxes for local purposes on the gas for people, why not? I mean, why not? You can do it maybe, so do it. There's too many people driving around aren't really particularly doing anything in particular that's helpful to anybody else. They're just driving around. And, you know, with the bicycles and the horses, you get more exercise. It's a lot more fun. Then there's jobs for the lawyers, you know, when they clean up the streets and all that kind of stuff. So the information I'm telling you about the earthquake, is rock solid as opposed to false flags. And students that ride their bike, even in Florida, should know that what happened in Florida, and the same thing that happened in Orlando, was what they call false flags. So any students listening should look up the term false flag and get acquainted. Think, because there were multiple shooters in both events, and they should know this. And have a beautiful afternoon.
That's all the cards I have. Bring it back to the council. Any further questions for staff? Get a motion on the table, Ms. Combs.
I'm not quite sure yet. I would like to hear from my colleagues, but I'll put the motion on the floor for discussion if that's all right.
Please.
Resolution of the Council of the City of Santa Rosa approving an amendment to the project work order with BKF Engineers for the environmental study evaluation of an additional bridge alignment for the U.S. Highway 101 bicycle and pedestrian bridge improvement. Waive further reading of the text.
Second.
Mr. Tibbetts?
This one's a little bit of a tough one for me. On the one hand, I see the need. Caltrans has made a strong recommendation, and we know what that means when we hear from the higher powers that be. On the second, it's quite a bit of money for a bridge that the public doesn't seem to really want anyways. It doesn't seem to have the same use and utility as the other street, Elliott. So I'll wait to hear from my colleagues too, but I'm probably leaning no on this one.
Mr. Schwedhelm.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I am supportive of this recommendation for a couple of different reasons. One, I think the council that will be tasked with making this decision, whenever that may be, is going to want this information. And I think it would be glaring to say, wow, we need more information in order to make that very expensive decision. The other thing, it's always kind of a challenge for a council to predict what's the campus of Santa Rosa Junior College going to look like whenever this gets built. I know they're having discussions now to put some student housing there. Well, what if the student housing is going to be right in this general location? Wouldn't that be convenient for pedestrian traffic? And so looking into that future, it's like, that actually might be a wonderful location. Don't know if the junior college is going to do it, but I know that's an interest in the junior college. And I really think we have really one chance to get it right. And I'm not thrilled by $379,000 going into this. But if you look at the long-range project, I think we have to get it right, and this is information that council, I think, will need before they make that ultimate decision. So I'm supportive of this.
Mr. Sawyer.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, this is one of those really difficult choices and decisions. I've really gone back and forth. I've gone back and forth with this project from the beginning years ago, mainly because of the amazing or the very high cost of the project in general, from beginning to end. It's always been, I kind of wonder how much each of the uses might cost in the future. But over the long term, I know how important this project is to our east-west travel, whether it be pedestrians and bicycles. I am concerned about the pedestrians using this particular, the southern location, but that's today. And I realize that and this is going to take probably quite some time before the council that is seated here in the future makes a decision on this project. And they probably would appreciate, although I'm loath to spend it, another $380,000 to get the second possibility analyzed. But in the probably distant future, unfortunately, because of costs and our current fiscal situation, the council that's seated here in the future, I believe, will appreciate seeing this analysis. And that money will be less valuable then than it is now. And they may be saying, if we hadn't done it, why didn't they consider this other site? Why didn't they consider another alternative? Caltrans may be saying the same thing. Why didn't they consider another alternative? And this whole area is going to change. Mr. Nutt's discussion about the reason for this east-west connector is bigger than the JC, and it's bigger than the Coddingtown. It's bigger than the train. I mean, this is a very important east-west connector that we don't have, unfortunately, and every year that we waited, it got more and more expensive. And the Bear Cub Way is less expensive and might actually prompt the council of the future to either move forward or not, because it costs 25% less than the other alternative, which could delay the project even further. So although I'm really uncomfortable spending the money to do that analysis, I think that it will ultimately serve us well, serve the council well that has to make the decision on this very expensive and difficult project in the future. So I would move to support the expenditure in analyzing the Bear Cub Way alternative. As painful as it is for me to do, was painful, is painful, and will be painful. So pain is pain. I'm ready to go forward.
Mr. Rogers.
Well, I certainly agree with my colleague that it's painful. For me, I think it's very apparent that there is a preferred crossing, Edwards and Elliott. The community wants that crossing. I think it sounds like the JC wants that crossing. I want to make it very clear, I want that crossing. But there is something that's stuck in my mind that actually my appointee to BPAB mentioned to me, and he said that when they approved this, in his mind, it was an insurance policy that we have a crossing. And so I'm willing to move forward with this to get the information that we need to have in the future in the event that the Edwards-Elliott crossing falls through for whatever reason. But my strong preference, and some of us may still be around when the project comes along, is for the Edwards-Elliott crossing. But again, I see this as an insurance policy that we get a crossing built.
Thank you. You know, this has been a matter of interest to this community for a long time. I believe there is support for this project. It's a community connector that people have been begging for at least 15 years, probably more. Getting from one side of Santa Rosa to the other is simple if you do it across the street here from City Hall. If you want to go on College Avenue or Steel Lane, you better have some intestinal fortitude if you're not in a car or a truck or something bigger. Bicyclists and pedestrians don't have much of a chance there. I think that the northern alternative here is the preferred alternative. It's probably in a better location, but it is obviously a complicated crossing, and we've talked about for years about how costly it is too. If we can find a cheaper way to do this, I think it's more likely that this will happen in the future. More information is better in this case, and I think it will help future councils to make what'll be a controversial decision, because it's not a cheap project either way, and it doesn't move cars, but it actually moves people. So I'm going to support this tonight, and it would be great if I was still around when we were supporting building the darn thing. Ms. Combs.
It's remarkably difficult to spend $380,000 when the option for Edwards and Elliott is so clear. I understand my colleague's position, wanting to move this forward, to give people any option that, the future councils to have options. I understand that desire, and there certainly have been times I've sat here and wished that I had more information from the past. But for me, it's just going to be really hard to spend $380,000 studying something that I think we shouldn't be doing. That said, I take the advice of my colleagues, and I again strongly prefer Edwards Elliott, but I would allow the money to be spent if that's the will of my colleagues. I just basically I can count, and I don't have the desire to fall on this particular sword. But I think we've made it clear to staff that Edwards Elliott is really where it's at. Thanks.
We have a motion and a second. Your votes, please. That passes with 6 ayes. Councilmember Oliveris is absent. We have no public hearings, no written communications, any cards for final public comment. We are adjourned.